Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Columbia River Basin team meeting. My name is Stephen Phillips. I'm a senior program manager with the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission based in Portland, Oregon. I just looked at our web page for past meetings, and this is our 20th year of CRB team meetings, believe it or not. Yeah, clap, clap. This is the monitoring portion of the CRB team. And so I'm going to turn it over to hear from Leah for any directions that are needed. And then we'll go to Tim Cunahan and Robin Drawheim. Go ahead, Leah, and welcome everybody.
Yeah, good morning and welcome everybody. Happy New Year. Glad to see a lot of you joining the meeting today. I know everybody's still kind of trickling in, but we have almost 80 people registered for today, which is fantastic. I want to encourage all of you to ask questions to our presenters, and you can put that in the question box. If you're a panelist, you can put that also in the chat box, and I'll do my best to get to those questions in the time that we have. If you can put who the questions to in front of it, that's really helpful to me. Let's see, and then finally at the close of tomorrow's meeting, we do have a time for public comment. So if you have things to bring up that go beyond the scope of the agenda, I would encourage you to, raise your hand for that public comment period. And then finally, we will have a recording of this meeting available at the close of the meeting, and that will be posted on the westernai.org website along with the agenda, etc. So thanks again for joining us today. And if you have experienced any issues, I guess, reach out to me via email during the meeting, and I'll do my best to help address those. So with that, Tim Cunahan with the U.S. Geological Survey and Robin Drawheim are going to lead the monitoring portion. So thank you. Go for it.
Thank you, Leah, and welcome everybody. Session of the Columbia River Basin Dreissenid Mussel Monitoring Forum. As is typical for our winter meeting, we're going to have updates from folks that are conducting monitoring in the Columbia River Basin. But we're going to start out a couple of informational presentations, and then we're going to wrap up with a discussion of the monitoring map. Robin. Robin, do you have anything to add?
I don't. Thanks, Tim. I'm just happy to be here and jump into this again.
And Happy New Year, everybody. So with that, I think we should just jump right into it. And the next presentation is going to be by Anthony. Started looking at invasive species over 20 years ago, and according to his own almost unhealthy interest in invasive species work after cutting his hand open zebra mussel in his favorite sea cave on Lake Champlain. Since then, his work has included a variety of invasive species from rusty crayfish to Eurasian water milfoil. He has a master's degree in fisheries resources from Idaho, and he has worked as a biologist for the Bureau of Reclamation for 16 years and feels lucky to be working in a field he's passionate about. So with it over to Anthony.
Thank you, Tim. Tim was cutting out a little bit there on me, so hopefully my audio goes through. I'm not going to turn on my video just because my internet is not the best. So I am going to jump into my presentation that is talking about spatial and temporal variability in water quality to improve our confidence in establishment risk assessments. So I'm going to focus today on the lentic environment. So rivers, or not rivers, so lakes and reservoirs. If you want my opinions on streams and rivers and their influence with pH and calcium, we can talk about that later. So there's two main risk categories for invasion: introduction risk which I'm not going to be talking about today, about how mussels are going to get there, and then establishment risk, which I am going to be talking about today. And there's many different aspects in the establishment risk arena, but I'm going to focus today just on calcium and pH data, and how that can influence where our sampling might be prioritized due to the risk assessments that are going on. So Tim has worked with many of you to develop a risk categorization for calcium and pH and some other variables. I'm going to be, like I said, focusing on calcium and pH. So in this case, I'm going to be showing quite a few figures that are similar to this. Low risk would be the 0 to 8 on the bottom. Medium risk would be 8 to 20, and high risk would be greater than 20, just to familiarize you with that format. Similarly, but a little bit more complicated with pH, the high risk is kind of sandwiched in between medium and low risk above and below that. So these categories were developed using field and lab studies, data from field and lab studies, and there's still some uncertainty, at least as far as my understanding is, of how some of the field data was collected and the spatial and temporal variability in that field data. They acknowledge that there is variability, but they are using the means overall for pH and calcium. So I wanted to look into what goes into getting a mean and what that really means. So looking at variability, the mean versus the range, and comparing that to our breakpoints for calcium and pH. This is all of Reclamation's lentic sites in the Columbia River Basin put into a box plot. So the blue lines show the variability of the highest and lowest individual samples taken at any of these individual sites. The red and the green lines are our breakpoints, and we do get some overlap of the breakpoints with individual data, but we are not seeing any sites with calcium that is below the low breakpoint, and also on the same site information with calcium above the high. So we're able to separate that out relatively confidently, and this stands for most of the calcium data and the rest of the CRB as well, besides reclamation sites. pH is a bit more complicated. We have a lot of variability going on, where there are some sites that have individual pH measurements that are below the lowest low, that are also low because they're so high. This is, again, just reclamation's data, but there is some data out there where the range of pH at an individual site spans all of the different risk categories on the high side and the low side of that sandwich that we're looking at here. So I'm going to jump into pH first and then come back to calcium as we tie things together at the end. So what is causing all of this variability? Atmospheric CO2 dissolves in the water. We're adding more CO2 from respiration, and photosynthesis takes out CO2. So what's important about CO2? CO2 dissolves in water to create carbonic acid. So CO2 is actually going to be the main player in what is going on with the pH dynamics within an individual profile. So at the surface, you're getting increased pH from the photosynthesis taking out carbon dioxide. At the bottom, you're getting decreased pH because your bacterial respiration is using up oxygen, but creating CO2 and changing that CO2. So what does this actually mean? This is a profile at Tailgate Reservoir in Idaho. And if you put our range back on here, our low is 7 on one end, and then we're at 9.4 on the other end. So we're kind of spanning in one individual profile on one individual day, looking at the depth on the left and the pH on the top here. We're seeing the highest photosynthesis occurs right around the thermocline, so that's our highest level of pH. And then the bacteria are breaking all of that stuff down as it falls down to the bottom. With an overall mean of 7.6 for this individual instance, as we go through one individual year at this site, the variability is less at this February timeframe, and the overall pH is also less. But as we move on, we have all sorts of variability as that primary productivity and breakdown changes with the changing temperatures in the season. We're seeing an overall mean for this individual year that I'm showing here of around 7.4, and nope, 7.65 for this 1 year and 7.4 for all years at this site combined. But as you can see, there's a lot of areas where mussels would be in very happy conditions for pH at the higher end near the surface, and the means may not actually be representative of what's going on. So that brings us back to this variability, looking at that again. What does this really mean when we're seeing all of this variability? How much can we trust one individual profile? So if you took one of these profiles and that's all the data you had, you may be making different conclusions based on when you collected that individual data set compared to having the amount of data that's available at some of our sites. On top of that seasonal variation, we're also seeing interannual variation. So this is Payette Lake, the most recent data being from 2007. And I would, if I only had this data and I was confident in pH, I would say that this was going to be a low risk site or lake. You look at some of the data from the 90s and it gets a little bit more complicated. And then you look at the rest of the data set that's available and you have some individual years where all of the data is in the high risk category, and some of the years where almost none of the data is in the high risk category. So this makes me concerned about using pH as a risk factor, but the literature showing that there is a correlation there. This is seasonal variability again, where we have the overall variability in blue and the variability of the means, the daily means in orange here. So we're seeing the ability for one individual site or one individual water body to have means in all of these different risk categories depending on when your sampling is. And we're not all lucky enough to have this much sampling to be able to look at that information and make conclusions in the long run. But calcium data is not as readily available as pH data. So we have 982 sites in the CRB with calcium data on the water quality portal, and then almost 2,000 sites with pH data. So what is going on with this literature that's saying the 7.3 is a cutoff? The graph on the lower right here is showing that all of those sites in these European lakes that had pH below 7.3 did not have mussels in them. So that's a mean pH. We're showing you that mean pH also means that there is some pH above that level and there's a whole bunch of variability. And then why does that pH level match up with some of the lab studies that are at static pHs that show the actual impacts are at that same level, where we know, okay, 7.3 is a cutoff for a static water level or a static pH level. Why, when we know if they were just using the mean and we have data when the mean is at 7.3, that there is going to be some information or some locations and timeframes higher than 7.3 almost always. So what is going on here? We're going to dive into chemistry a little bit. I'm sorry. Calcium and alkalinity are often highly correlated. So both calcium and alkalinity are driven in large part by calcium carbonate in the water basin. So calcium carbonate breaks down into dissolved calcium and your alkalinity. So alkalinity, or the resistance to acidification, regulates the extent of the variability of that pH. So can we say, without defining what low means, that a low pH equals low alkalinity, and low alkalinity equals low calcium, therefore low pH equals low calcium? Is that really what we're seeing? So this is one of the studies that was used in development of that pH level and the calcium levels that are used in the risk categorization that I talked about earlier. So that shows this pH below 7.3 or 7.45 in this particular case has no mussels, but it also has no areas where there's high calcium levels. So if we look at data from the water quality portal that covers a lot of the Columbia River Basin sites, we see a similar pattern where a lot of the data that's out there is outside of this red box that is higher calcium levels and lower pH. So is there actually a relationship between calcium and pH instead of a direct relationship between pH and mussel establishment? Some of the exceptions in this arena that are these blue dots inside the red box, there's a lot of lakes on Mount St. Helens or other volcanoes, some mine sites, bogs, and a few sites with low sample sizes or that are very close to the boundaries on that site. So we may be looking at an indirect risk instead of a direct risk from pH, because that variability you see over time, it could, when you sample, may give you a different risk categorization. So if we look back at the calcium information, field and lab studies are showing similar critical values, and the field data is not as variable as pH. Lower calcium concentrations near our breakpoints are actually more stable than the calcium overall, and you get higher variability with higher calcium as it gets towards some of the carrying capacity limits for different things. So looking back at this graph of calcium variability for reclamation sites, it is very similar to, but you can't visualize all of the 695 sites that are on the water quality portal. So that shows the same pattern, but there are some exceptions. There's a lot of mine sites in there. So if you just look at the data overall and don't dive into the details, you may think there is a lot of variability, but that's a few dozen sites that are at mine areas where you have really high variability all over the board from calcium levels. Similar on volcanoes, we have some evaporation and salt carrying capacity things going on the Idaho-Nevada border. Lake McDonald, I think, is just a data error because 14,000 milligrams per liter is nowhere near the range of the rest of the data for the Columbia River Basin. And Flathead Lake, I cannot explain. So that's the only site within the Columbia River Basin that has calcium variability in all three risk categories that I can't explain. So it's all the low calcium is from spring of 79. And if anybody has any ideas, we can talk about that a little bit later. Calcium seems to be the best metric. If pH data is also available, it may not really add anything because pH may just be acting as a surrogate in the field studies for calcium. If only pH data is available, you can use it, feel comfortable to use it with caution, but make sure you're looking at, is it a full profile versus just a surface measurement, and try to understand the spatial and temporal variability within the individual data set for the site or the lake that you're looking at. In my mind, pH could be just used mainly as an area to focus calcium sampling on where you have that low pH. So again, a reminder that I am confident in calcium as a risk factor and pH kind of as a surrogate for calcium where calcium data is not available, but that's only a small part of overall risk. Into the future, I would like to expand this a little bit more and do some more statistics on the relationship between pH less than 7 or 7.3 and calcium and or mussel presence. And then look at some of the other risk factors that I've talked about in other presentations, where floating marinas and enclosed areas where villagers can get concentrated and not spread out. And then if anybody has any questions, I don't know what we are for time now that I got screwed up a little bit there, but also just a tickler, this is the data from 1979 at Flathead Lake that I don't understand what's going on.
Thanks, Anthony. I think that if anybody has any questions for Anthony, maybe they could put them in the chat or catch up with Anthony. Thank you so much, Anthony, for the informative presentation. Definitely points there. And I think with that, we will switch back to Sherry. So Sherry, if you could, I would just start at the beginning again.
Okay, can do that.
Thank you. Thanks, Anthony.
Right. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, again, I'm going to be presenting some case studies today about impact and control mussels at hydropower plants. I was showing this map here about where all of Reclamation's reservoirs are in the west and where we have issues with quagga mussels and zebra mussels. The biggest issue for Reclamation has been so far the impact at our hydropower plants. The mussel fouling at hydropower plants really increases the maintenance, and it can lead to unplanned outages as well. So these mussels are able to attach pretty much on any submerged surface inside the plant. They are able to attach anywhere where raw water is used. So typically that's, and where it's flowing at a lower velocity. So that's at about 4.5 feet per second or less. So mussels are able to settle on intakes, gates, submerged instrumentation, and then these small diameter pipes. And when these pipes become occluded, the water is not able to flow, and that can lead to overheating of systems like generators. Shell debris is also an issue inside of the plants. It enters and it accumulates in locations like strainers and screens, and that can lead to overheating issues as well. So, although we know the general issues that we're dealing with mussels at our hydropower plants, it has been very difficult at Reclamation to quantify the impacts at our hydropower plants. It's really not easy to track all of the maintenance and costs. It's not easy to drill down to that level in the work orders and the way that it's set up. So that has been kind of difficult. And I think it's also difficult for managers at these facilities to prepare for potential infestations because, there's just so many variables at play, and the impacts are always going to be very facility specific. So it's just not one size fits all for planning. So what we did for this project is we compiled case studies of hydropower plants across the United States and in Canada that have invasive mussel infestations, and we detailed their experiences. So the purpose for doing this, one, we interviewed some reclamation plants so we could get a better understanding of the impacts at reclamation plants. And then also gathering information from outside of Reclamation, we feel would provide information for managers that are trying to prepare or for managers that are considering changes to existing approaches. This project was a commitment to the Department of Interior Safeguarding the West initiative, and then it was funded by Reclamation's S&T program, and I did these interviews in collaboration with R&T Consulting. So what we did is we interviewed 13 hydropower plants that have mussel infestations. 4 of them were Reclamation, Hoover, Davis, Parker, Glen Canyon. 3 of them are operated by other agencies in the United States, Army Corps of Engineers, Tennessee Valley Authority, and New York Power Authority. And then 6 plants were in Canada, operated by Hydro-Quebec, Ontario Power Generation, and Manitoba Hydro. So what we did is we set up about a 2-hour phone interview with managers on the ground dealing with the problem. We asked about how the plants are designed, how they're operated, how raw water is used within the plant. We wanted to know about the mussel infestation timeline. Had they done any response planning prior to mussels being detected? And was there an early detection and monitoring program in place before mussels were detected? We also asked about what specific mussel impacts were occurring, what systems and components were impacted, were there any design aspects that prevented or reduced mussel impacts, and then have they experienced unplanned or forced outages because of mussel fouling? Then we got into asking about what control methods they were using or which they had examined. And then where possible, we tried to gather expenses associated with mussels. So all the plants had different designs. They all used raw water differently. They were different sizes. One plant only had 2 generator units, another had 36 generator units, and they had all been dealing with mussels for different periods of time. So one plant had only had mussels for a year, and another we interviewed had been dealing with mussels for 31 years. We got a range of information here. So in this report, there's a lot of very detailed information. I'm just going to provide a few examples just so you can kind of see the type of information we gathered. So I'll first start with Hoover Dam. This is a reclamation facility, Lake Mead. Their issue, main issue is that the thrust-bearing cooler becomes plugged with mussels, and it results in unplanned outages, forced outages. So they have about 1 to 3 outages per year. It takes 3 to 5 days per outage to deal with it, 8 to 12 people working on the outage, and they say it costs probably about $20,000 per day of lost production and unrealized revenue to have the generator down. And the estimated cost to deal with a single outage is about $44,000 to $80,000. At Hoover Dam, they are implementing some preventative control measures. They have converted to using tailgate water instead of water from the reservoir to cool their generators. There's just less mussels, less shell debris in that tail race water. So they pump that in. That cost $500,000 to do that reconfiguration. And they are also in the process of installing hydro-optic disinfection UV, which will cost about $2.1 million to install that. They decided to go with the UV installation at this site because of the success at another reclamation site downstream on the Colorado River at Parker Dam. That's at Lake Havasu. At Parker Dam, prior to installing UV, they were having to devote 8 weeks of labor per year to clean mussels and biofilm out of their heat exchangers. Picture here. When these heat exchangers get plugged, an alarm goes off, it begins to overheat, they have to pull it out and clean it. Since they installed the UV, they have not had to do those 8 weeks of cleaning on those, so they can use that time for other activities. So UV was a success at that location. At Glen Canyon Dam, which is at Lake Powell, they don't have issues right now with outages like we do at Hoover and some other sites, but mussel fouling and sediment is just a big maintenance issue. So this picture here is of fixed wheel gates at Glen Canyon Dam, and it takes 2 extra days of maintenance and to remove all of those mussels on that fixed wheel gate. Plus, it makes them very heavy to pull out of the water. They've made some other changes to maintenance within the plant. Some yearly maintenance they were doing. Now they have to do some quarterly maintenance. They have to do monthly just to kind of keep up with that mussel fouling. But in the future, they are planning to install UV as well at this site. So we did interview 4 power plants in Canada operated by Ontario Power Generation, all in the same general area on the same body of water. Mussels were detected here in 1990, and they had a lot of issues right off the bat trying to deal with the mussels and get it under control. But now they do a 10-day chlorine treatment once per year at this site at all 4 of those plants, and it has controlled fouling in their cooling systems, which is their main issue. The capital investment between those 4 plants ranged between $250,000 to $1.3 million to install that chlorine treatment, and the yearly cost to continue to do that is about $7,000 to $24,000 at each plant. So at the sites, they've pretty much got it under control, and mussels aren't as big of an issue for them anymore. On the other end of the spectrum, we interviewed Wilson Hydropower Plant, which is located in Alabama and operated by Tennessee Valley Authority. This site has 21 generator units. Mussels were detected here also in the early 1990s, but they're not able to do chemical treatments at this site. There is a native endangered mussel downstream of the plant, so they just have to deal with it with increasing their maintenance. It's kind of interesting, their issues kind of stem from the design of their plant. Mussel fouling is most significant on units 1 through 8, and that's because of where the surface water source comes from. So on units 1 through 8, the intake is about 14 feet below the surface. So there's a lot of mussels at that depth. Other units like 9 through 12 receive water from the bottom of the penstock scroll case, which is about 45 feet below the surface. So there's just, I guess, less mussels at that depth, and they don't have as many issues. So on those units 1 through 8, they have to clean the headers of those units frequently. It costs $500,000 per cleaning. They have to do an extensive outage. They have to cut into pipes, remove pipes, replace them, hydroblast pipes, just to clean it out. They, in the past, have had up to 12 forced outages per year because of mussels. Now they're at about 3. They were able to get that down by just optimizing the backwash flushing and temperature flow monitoring. They also increased the planned maintenance outages to kind of keep ahead of things before they got out of control, but they have to do like 10 planned maintenance outages per month at times. And they also do something interesting. They purchased replacement coolers at $72,000. So when the generator air cooler begins to overheat, they have to do an outage, but they pull it out, put in the replacement cooler, and it gives them time to clean it out, the other one out. It does require additional staff and overtime. So it costs about like $4,000 to $5,000 per swap. So what we found after interviewing 13 plants is that mussel fouling is considered very significant at 2 of the plants we interviewed. Wilson was one of them. You can see it's a day-to-day issue that they're dealing with. 8 of the plants considered mussel impacts to be moderate, and 3 of them actually said that there's little to no impact. Those plants were the one that had, mussel fouling for only a year, so who knows what will happen there. And then also the sites that have had them for a very long period of time, and they kind of got a method under control to deal with it. Severity of impact, we found it was more related to the design of the power plant and how raw water is used, not the size or number of generators there. And then also mussel population cycles play a big role. Up in Canada, they're only reproducing a few months out of the year, whereas in lower Colorado region area, mussels are reproducing throughout the year, so there's fouling that they have to deal with throughout the year. So some differences there. 5 of the 13 plants we interviewed had experienced unplanned outages because of mussel fouling. And then it was interesting to find that mussel fouling expenses are not really commonly recorded or tracked very well. So it's not just us at Reclamation that are having a hard time with this. It's very difficult to drill down to that level for some reason. But we were able to get some numbers for this report, dollar values. 8 of the plants have implemented preventative treatments to kind of keep ahead of this mussel fouling. The chlorine was the most common. The capital investments at the sites we interviewed were between $100,000 and $1.3 million for chlorine. And then for hydro-optic disinfection UV, that's also commonly used. Capital investment is $1 million to $2.1 million. The other 5 plants just deal with the fouling by increased cleaning and doing some operational changes. As I mentioned before, we did ask plants about if they had response plans or had done a facility vulnerability assessment in advance, and 7 of the 13 plants had, and they said that it was extremely useful. It really allowed the control methods to be implemented before fouling became completely unmanageable and really shut things down. So that was very useful to them. And interestingly, for early detection, most sites were not doing early detection monitoring. monitoring typically began at the plant and in their upstream after adults were detected in the water body for these sites. So I made this little table here to show you. So these are the plants we interviewed, this kind of information about the location, but I just wanted to draw your attention to this, these years here, these dates. This first column is when the adults were detected in the water body, and then this is the year when they were actually began having issues at the plant, or when mussels were first detected at the plant. So you can see even at Hoover Dam, mussels were detected, adults were detected in Lake Mead 2007. They didn't start having issues until 2010. So that provided 3 years of time to plan. Other sites didn't have as much time, maybe only a year, if that. But then some locations had 5 years, 7 years, 10 years to get things up and running and a response plan implemented. And I can only imagine that if they were actually doing early detection, they would have had even more time. We always say at least 5 years if you're doing early detection for these plants to kind of get a plan in place. So I think early detection is very important for managing mussels at hydropower plants. So what we found overall is, it's very important for these facilities at these water bodies to do a risk assessment. Is the water body going to be suitable for mussel establishment? Then implement that early detection and monitoring plan, do a facility vulnerability assessment well in advance, and use that to create a response plan. And I think that this project here with these case studies can be very useful because we can provide some very detailed information for people who have never dealt with biofouling issues. They can look at the case study and say, oh, my plant's kind of designed like this. These might be some of the issues that might come into play, and they can plan accordingly. So that's all I have today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. For a question for Sherry, does anybody have a question?
There is one question, if we want to cover that real quick before we go to the other updates. So Blaine Parker is asking regarding if you have some insight on the use of chlorine in the Ontario power plants. Do they use chlorine gas or chlorine liquid? And what is their process to remove dead mussels after they kill them off?
Yes, I believe they use chlorine liquid there, and it's like a whole mobile setup that they bring in and out of there. They contract out, and they have installed, I believe, extra strainers and backwash flushing to deal with that big slug of adult mussels that come through. So I think the strainers are really key, and it does require time to clean out those strainers more frequently after that chlorine treatment. But they've got it under control where they pinpointed the locations where the mussels accumulate most.
Great, thank you, Sherry. Just briefly as well, Michael Stevenson, he's asking if there's a report that this is summarized in, and I believe there is, but Sherry, if you want to share that with me, I can circulate it to the larger CRB to make sure everybody gets that.
Yes, definitely. I'll provide you that report.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I do see one more question from Steve Bolins asking, have you or others looked into impacts of the Asian clam?
Yes, and I myself don't have much information about that. I know R&T has Renata Cloudy at R&T Consulting, who I worked on with this project, knows a bit more about that, and they can have similar issues, especially when it comes to the shell debris portion of things. And I think, yeah, if you would like some additional information, I could connect you with Renata. I think she has a little bit more information on that.
Thank you so much, Sherry.
Yeah.
Great presentation, and I think such a great idea to start to quantify effects and put numbers to the effects of zebra and quagga mussels. So thank you so much for the presentation. And with that, we're going to move into some of our updates. And first up is March and Martina is the invasive fauna unit head with the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
And can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you and good morning. Yeah, so I'm going to give a update, give a bit of a recap on our invasive mussel lake monitoring efforts from 2021 and just give an update on our plans for the coming monitoring season. So in terms of our sampling efforts from this past year, in addition to, of course, the ongoing challenges of conducting fieldwork and sampling during the pandemic, in British Columbia, we did face quite a challenging year in terms of sort of extreme weather events, including an unprecedented wildfire season, as well as extreme period of hot temperature during the summer, which some of you may have heard is referred to as the heat dome. So parts of our province reached some pretty record-breaking levels of heat. So of course, this certainly created some challenging conditions for conducting sampling, and of course impacted being able to access sites and locations for collecting samples as part of our monitoring. But despite a number of these different challenges that were faced last season, we were still able to have a very similar, almost the same level of sampling as we did in 2020. So we had 900 plankton tow samples that were collected across 75 water bodies. There were some additional water bodies that were sampled using the artificial substrate samplers. In addition to these, the locations shown on the map here just represents those for plankton tow sampling. And these samples were collected by a number of different partners, and I'll talk about our partner sampling program shortly, but you can see that it's through quite a collective effort of across a wide range of different partners, as well as some ministry staff in certain parts of the province also collect samples. So it's a great partnership program that we have set up for the sample collection. And all those plankton tow samples get sent to a designated lab that we have set up through the ministry for the actual sample analysis, which is done using the cross-polarized microscopy. And fortunately, all of our plankton tow samples came back negative, and our substrate samplers for zebra and quagga mussels. So another year of no positive detections, which is certainly what we want to see. So it was a successful, despite some of the challenges that we had in terms of our 2021 sampling efforts. And in addition to checking for, of course, zebra quagga mussels in our sampling, the samples are also checked for other AIS, including Corbicular, so the invasive clam. We do have several known locations of invasive clams, Corbicular, in BC, and we did have some positive samples through the plankton tow collection that came back in 3 water bodies where adults had already previously been confirmed. So this was in a water body in the Lower Mainland, as well as one water body in our Thompson region, as well as also in the Pend Oreille River in the Kootenay region. So we did see, in addition to adults through some visual surveys, did have some come back through our plankton tow sampling as well. And in terms of our plans for the upcoming 2022 sampling season, we just finished going through the process of reviewing our annual water body priority list. So as part of our, we conduct an annual review of our list of water bodies that are prioritized for plankton tow sampling. And so we use a combination of looking at the risk of invasive mussel survival establishment, as well as looking at risk of introduction to identify priority water bodies for sampling. And our risk of survival, building on Anthony's earlier presentation, the primary water quality parameter that we're looking at for that is calcium, as well as we do bring in temperature. And we did assess looking at pH, but unfortunately due to limitations of availability of data at the provincial scale for pH, it wasn't included. So calcium is the primary data variable that we use. And part of the update that we conducted this year was looking back at our data through our environmental monitoring system, which houses all of our water quality data, and brought in all of the available calcium data and assessed it at the sub-watershed scale. And using those same calcium risk categories that Anthony presented earlier, so looking at low risk being those less than 8, moderate between 8 and 20, and then high being greater than 20. And then also bringing in temperature as a lower bound limiting factor to look at if temperature is a limitation in any of those sub-watersheds. So this was an update that we did to our risk of survival assessment. And then coming back to our risk of introduction, so we looked at a wide range of different variables to include. One piece that continues to be a bit of a challenge is availability of data at a spatial scale across the province. So some variables that we looked at including had much more limited data available spatially at the provincial scale. So we had to look at different pieces, which is part of why we do this annual review, to see if new or more data becomes available on an annual basis to look to include within that. So some of the main variables that we are looking at, we include our watercraft inspection data to look at our total inspections since the program started, so looking at our data sets going back to 2015, looking at specifically where high risk and mussel-fouled boats are destined for to prioritize those water bodies based on risk. And then also looking at different variables to assess access and recreational use. So things like angler use, as well as whether there's different watercraft restrictions in terms of the types of boats that are allowed to be used on water bodies, so motorized versus non-motorized, as well as looking at variables like whether there's marinas present on the water body. Some data sets that were looked at, but unfortunately data gaps were a challenge, was looking at water body boat launch data continues to be a challenge to get spatially at the provincial scale. We did also assess things like campgrounds and other recreational use factors as potential variables as well. So that was part of our reviewing those variables and bringing them into a model to develop our updated priority water body list for plankton tow sampling. And we certainly do encourage substrate samplers to be used at water bodies that come out as lower priority. So if they aren't on the higher priority list for plankton tow sampling, certainly encourage where possible to still look at using substrate samplers in lower risk water bodies. And we are continuing to, I mentioned our partner grant program. So since 2018, we've been working with the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, and they administer a grant program for which enables partners from across the province to apply for grants to conduct the invasive mussel sampling. And so this is something that we've been doing annually, and actually the call for grants is just come out for this coming season. And so we work with the HETF to get those grants administered on an annual basis. The grants are funded through a combination of provincial and federal funding, and it supports a combination of primarily plankton dough samplings, but also some substrate samplers, and it's following the provincial protocol that I mentioned that is updated annually, and all those samples that get collected through the grant program get sent to our designated lab that I mentioned earlier that does the sample analysis using cross-polarized microscopy. And so currently applications are now open for our 2022 season. So the deadline for applications is February 4th. And we're currently anticipating similar sampling levels as we had last season. So I think I'll probably leave it there. And if there's time for any questions.
I see that there was a question, but you in a slide. So, are there any other questions for Martina?
I don't see any other questions. Right, one of them was answered as she progressed through her presentation. So I think we're good.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Martina.
Martina.
Next up would be Nick from Idaho. Hi, Nick.
Hi. So just looking at sharing, show my screen. Let's see. Can you guys see the screen yet?
I can see like your homepage. Yep.
You can see the PDF?
No, just see
No.
a lovely shot of, I don't know, the Bruno River. Where's
Oh, the info.
There it is.
There we go. Okay. All right, thank you all for the time to present. This will just be a quick update. Nick Zerflu, Idaho State Department of Agriculture. We manage the invasive species program across the state. And it's always tough following Martina because she does such a good job and a lot of good activities up in BC. Idaho, we roll out a very similar program, doing a couple of different tactics, looking for dreissenid mussels. And this will hopefully highlight some of that. Just to show you how it kind of fits in the overall program, our early detection monitoring program is kind of mixed in within some prevention and some management control and some outreach type activities. It's not really a forward-facing program. A lot of these activities kind of happen on the landscape, either by our own staff or by our cooperators who are out there sampling, but it's not as visible, say, as a boat check station on the side of the road. Nonetheless, this year was our 12th year monitoring Idaho, very similar programs. But I would like to shine a little light on the level of monitoring that has occurred. Early on, we were around 200 to 400 samples or survey events per year. That kind of worked up into about 900 sampling events in 2017. And as many folks on this call are aware, the WRDA Pacific States grant through the Army Corps of Engineers, it had a monitoring component to it. And so that essentially let us increase the level of monitoring activity in Idaho. And so in 2018, we saw the level go from 900 to 1,600. We went around that level for a number of years. In 2020, just due to COVID and some hiring, some impacts hiring, it went down to about 1,550, 1,560 samples. And then this last season, 2021, we were able to bring that back up just above that 1,600 sample events for dreissenid mussels. And so that's really good to see that come back up. But just to highlight the impact of WRDA and what that has on different parts of the program throughout the state, it has been great to see. So like I said, it was the 12th year of monitoring, no detections in 2021, which is great to hear that coming from BC as well. And I think we'll hear a similar story from the other states, which is good to hear. It's something that we always talk about. We use an Esri product called Survey 123 for the management and collection of the data, and I'll have a couple of slides on that. And then we have a series of sampling events that occur throughout the season, but occasionally we will need to go to an area we'll pull all the regions in one area and we'll call it a survey blitz. And we'll just spend the week up in, say, North Idaho to increase the sampling up there, just to help manage that workload. Along the same lines, we have great assistance from partners across the state, whether that's Idaho Power sampling in Hells Canyon or the Coeur d'Alene Tribe or Limhi County. A lot of these places are kind of far away, a lot of travel time from our regional offices, so it's just really good to have those partners be able to pick up that sampling events. Typically, that sampling will be folded into their water quality monitoring or whatever the entity is doing, and so they'll grab a plankton net and take it along and take some samples for us. So that was really good to see in 2021. I will say in 2020 that helped us out a lot. Same thing as last year, and similar to other states, we have a rapid response plan, of course, for Idaho, as well as it dovetails into the regional plan if a detection were to occur. So 2021 monitoring, you'll see our SOPs there on the right. Similar to BC, we outline how to take samples, whether that's a plankton tow using a plankton net, or if that's some kind of adult monitoring. All that is outlined in the SOP that's available online if you guys want to check that out. Like I said, last year we took just over 1,600 plankton tow samples across the state. We try to do multiple sampling events bi-weekly per water body. Similar to BC, we organize this into a decision matrix based off of several different factors. It designates the water body, whether it's critical, high, moderate, or low. And so that helps drive the management decisions on where we put the time and resource for sampling. So for example, Coeur d'Alene Lake, for example, would be a critical. Maybe some other smaller North Idaho lakes would be a high or moderate. We do ship those priority overnight to the lab, and then we require a 2-week turnaround time for lab analysis, and typically we're a bit below that. So we're looking at a week to a week and a half for most of our samples. On the adult survey side, once again, it's outlined in the protocol. These are during drawdowns, substrate sampling, ponar grabs, surface scrapers, all kinds of cool stuff. We did increase this last season. We're at just about 1,265 samples. Part of this was due to we're trying to understand Corbicular a little bit more in the Pond Ray watershed. We looked at that heavily, and then some of it had to do with our veliger sampling on Lake Cascade and backfilling some of those activities with adult monitoring. No detections there as well, but we also pick up other invasives. To note, would be more Corbicular being found, red swamp crayfish in the Lewiston area, which is a whole nother story working with a school down there. But during these surveys, we also find other things. We did focus some of our monitoring efforts for the Marimo mossball issue. So basically we would shift some of those samples to small urban lakes and ponds that we would theoretically think an aquarium would be dumped. So take Quinn's Pond here in Boise, very popular urban setting type pond, is not included in our statewide veliger sampling schedule, but due to the Marimo mossball issue, we put some of those resources towards those urban ponds. All this information can be found online, whether it's the SOP or the web monitoring map, which I'll show next. You can see we're scattered out throughout the state, and that's where we're sampling. So I believe that's my last slide, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to help answer them.
Thanks, Nick. Not seeing any questions. Do you see any questions, Leah?
No, I do not.
And real
Nick
quick,
always does
Tim and
such a
Leah,
fantastic job.
I would anticipate 2022 sampling to be very similar to what we saw in 2021.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Nick. Next up is Craig McLean. You out there, Craig?
Yep, just clicking buttons here. All right, can you see my screen?
We can, it just needs to go into presentation
Perfect.
mode. And then you, yeah, the swap thing. Whoop.
Wrong button. Okay, how
There we
about that?
go.
All
Great.
right. All right, so yeah, I'm Craig McLean. I'm the monitoring coordinator here at FWP in Montana. So I would say this last season was a pretty successful season for us. We had roughly a little over 10 groups helping us sample across the state for different species. Overall, we sampled collectively a little over 350 different water bodies. And those plankton samples that were sent into the FWP AIS lab, we saw a great reduction in our turnaround time. Thanks to all the hard work from the lab staff. We saw a turnaround about 7 days, which is significantly faster than we've had in the past. You know, it was great to come down and pass stuff off, and they're ready to grab it and start processing it. So it was pretty effective. For FWP within our program, we have 4 permanent employees that do early detection and monitoring work, and we hire 6 technicians that do a big chunk of our field work. A lot of these technicians have been coming back for multiple years, some of them 4 or 5 years. We've had them here working for us. We also hire a seasonal lab tech that helps process samples down in our lab, which really helps our workload. So when we're out sampling, we don't just sample for dreissenid mussels with plankton samples. We do all taxa survey work using all sorts of different sampling methods. You name it, we try to use it where it's suitable and effective. Similar to Idaho, we collect all of our data using Survey 123. It's tied right into our database internally, which makes our data flow really easy right into our AIS lab, so they can tie their results into it. So it's a pretty slick system. We try to get our partners to use it too, to help streamline that data process for us as well. So if we look just at the numbers, you know, this is a busy slide, but what I really want to highlight is, you know, we have lots of partners doing a lot of plankton sampling, but a lot of them don't do much more than the plankton sampling. We have some groups that do some eDNA sampling, but, you know, FWP does a lot of the other sampling methods. So I think there's some room for us to get more partners to do a little bit more work in that aspect where they have time and availability to do it. But really, if we look, you know, proportionally at our samples, you know, still FWP is collecting the bulk of the samples across the state. But what we're seeing is those partners are starting to take a bigger chunk and help us out collecting a higher percentage of those samples. So if you look over the last, you know, 5 years where we've really been tracking it, you can see an significant increase of partners' involvement collecting plankton samples across the state. So I think this is great news. And I think there's a lot of potential for some additional partnering here in Montana. But I think, you know, overall, it's good news for us. So if we look at kind of the spatial picture of it, so this is where we're sampling. You know, every point is a plankton location, and most of those points, unless if they're on shore, you know, closer to shore, those are also an all-taxa survey. So we really cover statewide. Every major water body in Montana we sample. The most high-risk ones we sample multiple times. So, you know, needless to say, I think like everybody, we also have no detections of dreissenid mussels in Montana this year. Otherwise, you probably would have heard about it long before this talk. But we did have several different detections of other species. So we had four different invertebrate species that we found in two plants with new populations. So kind of the biggest ones is New Zealand mud snails. We have confirmed populations of them in the Continental Divide, west of the Continental Divide, sorry, which is the first time we've found them in a natural setting. If you remember, several years ago, we've found them in a hatchery in the Bitterroot area, but these are near the Bitterroot and a pond near Missoula. So they're established now west of the Divide. Some red Rimmelania, we found a couple thermal areas with them in the east. One interesting one we found was Chinese mystery snail shell that we found in Flathead Lake. Our crew was having their morning coffee on the shore and came across the shell at a state park. We went back and searched snorkel surveys in the whole area and found no evidence of it. So we're not real sure what was that, if it was a pond or an aquarium release that didn't do so well in the cold water or what it was, but we'll be looking back at those sites again. And then one of our efforts we're doing is a statewide crayfish survey, and we found a new species in eastern Montana that isn't native, as far as we know, to Montana. Eurasian water milfoil, we've seen it spread into a new lake near Great Falls. And like always, curly pondweed pops up in new locations every year. So as far as Tiber, I think this is always on everybody's curiosity. You know, we continue this year to sample like we always have, throwing every tool we have, us and partners at Tiber, trying to find any evidence of adult mussels or veligers. So again, you know, we did all of those typical sampling that we do, but to no avail. We found nothing other than some native fat muckets, so which is good. So great news there. Kind of just as an update of like what's happened in the last 5 years. So we really threw what we could for resources at it this year, it being year 5. So we're working within the state in the department to remove that status that it has in our administrative rule, and it will no longer be considered positive, which removes some of that mandatory decontaminations after entering, which is exciting. Hopefully that will happen before we get into this next season. And so going forward, we'll still be sampling Tiber, probably not quite to the intensity we have been, but we will still be having it on our high risk water body to keep tabs on it. So going forward in 2022, most of our sampling will be very similar as it has been in the past, with the hopes to maybe add some additional partners and maybe additional supplemental sampling from them in areas where it would be suitable to add some additional sampling. So kind of with my last little couple minutes of time, I wanted to just talk about some of our interesting projects, our eradication and control projects we're doing across the state. We have several locations where we have invasive plants that we're trying to either eradicate or control. So Beaver Lake being one of them, I'll talk about that in a second. Holland Lake, we're working with the Forest Service to help manage some fragrant water lily we have in Holland Lake. while they work on weed management plans. We're trying to maintain it and keep it from spreading more places in the lake. So we use some scuba divers to get out there and help them pull some plants they couldn't handle from shore. Slip and slide ponds, that's a lake with curly pondweed near Yellowstone. This is the upper section of the Yellowstone River it feeds into. These are ponds that they were donated, and these were to the Forest Service. The Forest Service decided to drain these because they're high hazard dams, and at the same time, hopefully will eradicate pondweed. So you can see that picture, that green sheen on the lake is a large part of it is curly pondweed. So hopefully we'll see that go away, not spread through the Yellowstone system. Our new population of Eurasian water milfoil at Nyland. This is a little 1 acre bay in Nyland near Great Falls and Augusta on the east front of the Rockies. So we found that late in the season. So we went ahead and treated it late in the season. It's covered in ice, and hopefully when we get back there, we won't see much for milfoil remaining. So Beaver Lake is a kind of a long-term project. We're trying to eradicate Eurasian water milfoil from it. We use our dive team every year to go pull a small set of plants that are growing, and we've started using bottom barriers more to try to cover up those areas, just to try to kill it off completely. So hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll be able to check that one as taken care of. Kind of the biggest interesting project is Lake Elmo. So Lake Elmo, we found Corbiculas, clams, during a training we were conducting, and this is near Lake Billings. That's a state park. So this is part of an irrigation system. So it's able to manage the levels pretty effectively. So we decided to take a crack at it and try to eradicate these clams. They're the only known population we have in Montana. So we figured it's a good opportunity. So we started drawing it down passively in September, and it has the ability to draw down about 10 feet before it kind of bottoms out the outlet. So we'd have to turn to pumping to remove the remaining about 5 feet of water. So these are some pictures of where we're at in that process. So you can see the upper right is where they dug that trench to start draining it. So then we pulled in the commercial sized pumping systems to finish pumping it out. And within about a week, we finished pumping the rest of this water. You can see in this picture, all of that remaining water we pumped out in about 7 days. So this is what it looked like going into the fall. Pretty much completely drained. There's some inflow of water coming in from just surrounding areas that we aren't able to completely drain out. So this is what it went to going into the fall. And it took a little while to freeze, but it did eventually freeze up. So it'll be interesting to see come springtime what happens. We'll refill this in the spring as the irrigation season kicks back and starts filling it back up. And we'll see, in the next few years as we start monitoring it to see if we can find any established adults and juvenile live specimens. So hopefully we eradicated this, but I think this is a great project. It applies to, multiple species besides Asian clams, and potential for control for other species in the right situation. So with that, I'll end and turn it back over to Tim.
Thanks, Greg. Great presentation. I'm not seeing any questions, but I have one question. For the species that you detected other than quagga and zebra mussels, were all of those physical collections of specimens?
Or all of those, what was that? It broke up on me.
Were all of those physical collections?
Yes, yep. All ones we found the critter or shells of a critter, I guess.
And there is one question. I have a question for you, Craig. So Blaine Parker's asking if you guys have any plans to work with the landowner related to the New Zealand mud snail infestation in the Bitterroot area to make sure they don't spread into the associated rivers.
Yeah, so a big part of that is we're still kind of deleting exactly where they're at within that. It's a Mitchell Slough is what it's called. It's adjacent to the Bitterroot River. So as of right now, we've signed the locations we know we have at the road crossings, essentially. We've reached out to several different landowners and started looking for them on their property where the Mitchell Slough goes through. And so far, we've only found it in a few places, and one additional place in an irrigation ditch in the area. So we're still working on delineating it so we can really figure out how to contain it within it. But right now, wherever the public are accessing that slough, we have some information signs. We've reached out with the public release. So we'll be working in the future with some of those landowners to try to help contain that system.
Great.
Awesome. Okay, I see no more questions. Although wait, I should check the chat. Yeah, okay.
Next up would be Jesse Schultz, Washington. Jesse out there?
He is out there. There's Josie.
Hi, Jesse.
Can you see my presentation?
You are not sharing your screen. We can just see you.
I can see his presentation.
You can?
You can?
I can't.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, I
that's-
can see it too.
Oh,
Wait.
weird.
Uh-oh. Am I good to go?
There it is. Now I can see it. That's strange. All right. Thank you, technology. Go for it, Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jesse Schultz, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Aquatic Invasive Species Unit. So we are the lead on managing aquatic invasive animals. Okay. So first off, our program is very similar to all the other programs we've heard, just a few minor things, but one of the most important issues we have is our co-partners, and we like to see this list is getting bigger and bigger. So without our co-partners, we wouldn't be able to monitor all that we do. And this is the biggest list that we've had to date, and we could even add Washington State University to it. So this is a great thing, just like our samples, we want this increasing. That's the goal, to increase every year, and it is. So our 2021 early detection and monitoring stats, so you can see a lot of polka dots, and we classify our sites and water bodies as 4 different classifications. So if we break it down very broad, general is 2 classifications. It's high risk and low risk. And depending on the scoring that we give them, we will monitor them. Our highest risk up to 3 times a year. And then the lowest risk would be 1 every other year. So how did we come about why we monitor water bodies and risks? So like BC, our water body risk assessment it was templated off that. And then each year we're growing dramatically with the data that we're plugging into this risk assessment to not only determine which water bodies to, but it's just as important to determine what water bodies not to. So starting in 2022, we're going to add, as far as establishment water quality parameters, we've only used dissolved calcium. Starting in 2022, with some experiences we've had with our sampling and our analysis of some villager samples, we're going to add salinity. So that's a great parameter. So we've got a ton of salinity data where we can start looking at it and just continuing sites and water bodies based on salinity. So again, with that effort and resources, we can move to other places where we do need to monitor. So for our 2020 results, it's kind of similar to what we've done in the past, but again, always we want to each year do a little bit better, get a little bit more sampling. So our water quality, that includes dissolved calcium, And typically, we do at least around 800 samples a year starting since 2017. So we have, we're starting to get an amazing set of dissolved calcium data for Washington at our water bodies and sites. And all our dissolved calcium is analyzed by Eastern Washington University. And then we go into our other analysis, such as plankton toe. It's very similar. It's horizontal, vertical plankton toe. And the analysis is cross-polarized microscopy conducted by Steve Wells and Cameron Lane. And the one thing that jumps out from our 2020 results from previous years is our eDNA sampling is down a little bit. And all our analysis is done in-house by our genetics lab. And so our eDNA, not only are zebra and quagga mussels analyzed, but also our New Zealand mud snails and northern pike. So jumping into 2022. Well, first, we got to talk about northern pike really quick because they are becoming a very, very huge issue in Washington. And like I said, we do analyze all our eDNA samples to include northern pike. So Washington presently has these three species that get a little confusing. So northern pike are a prohibited species. Grass pickerel were bucket biologists way back in the day. So there's a couple lakes that have them. And then tiger muskie is a cross between a muscaline and a northern pike that the department does stock in a very low number of lakes throughout Washington. So you can see that here's some water bodies that do have that illustrate tiger muskie's got grass pickerel and northern pike. Again, we're more and more with our monitoring, we are trying to include northern pike because they are becoming such a big issue for Washington. Okay. So our plans for 2022, again, it's probably going to be similar to our previous years, but always trying to increase our sampling a little bit. But the biggest issue is our eDNA. We are planning to conduct double our eDNA samples we did last year. One of the biggest problematic factors with eDNA is the cost. It is definitely one of our most expensive sampling methods we do. Okay. So 2021, I don't want to say challenging, tired of that word, so we're going to say we're adapting and evolving. With every other program, COVID, how everybody had to implement different protocols, safety protocols for COVID. We have a huge binder now that all our teams have. That's just the department's COVID protocols, and just dealing with that aspect. Yeah, our crews have done a great job. But then not only is COVID, like Martina said, dealing with record heat, dealing with smoke. So in our protocols now, the first 2 pages doesn't even include anything about our sampling. It's all different types of protocols. We have our heat index, we have our air qualities. Okay, so that was a definite, very big issue we had in 2021, where air quality or heat were over certain measurements that our safety office would deem it was unsafe for crews to be out in the field. So we had to drastically rearrange where could we go throughout Washington where it was safe to put people in the field. So going into 2022, we have to assume that's going to be a big factor too. And so for our typical team, we have 2 people and 1 boat. And historically, it was basically a 1 team for Fish and Wildlife. But now we're evolving, and Nick spoke of WARDA, which has been a great budget increase for us. And not only WARDA, but our in-state legislature has given our department more money for AIS. So that's a great thing where everybody has realized, our state has realized that AIS is very important. and we should be adequately funding it. So last year, we did get an increase around July, and we were able to hire another team of 2. So we're trying to put them strategically throughout the state. We have Olympia, Western, and then 2 teams in Eastern Washington. So that was the first time our agency has had 3 teams. And then continuing that this year, we're going to start all 3 teams in May. So we're looking to have our best year, especially with staff. And we're having permanent staff and career seasonal staff now with that able funding. So typically, historically, we would just have non-permanent. So it would be a rollover of people coming in each year, maybe new to the position. And so we would have to take a fair amount of time onboarding, trainings, all those types of things. But now with the funding has secured us career seasonal positions and 1 permanent position. So we can have people that are very experienced in our sampling methods to hit the ground running. And just one of our permanent staff, definitely gotta say that they're going on their 15th year. So that's pretty remarkable for one of our surveyors, 15th year and counting. That's Mike Wilkinson. New. So with that additional funding, we're able to actually spend some money on outreach and education materials. So we've got our Don't Move a Mussel t-shirts for our surveyors. And we got this idea from our Washington Basin Species Council from Florida about these tailgate wraps. So we did a prototype. One was a Don't Let It Loose. You can see it right there. That's on one of our field vehicles. But now it was approved and everybody seems to like it, and they're fairly decent price. So we could start putting tailgate wraps geared towards mussel sampling on our vehicles. And one of the biggest accomplishments we have done is our data. So it seems like other entities, Idaho is using the 1, 2, 3. We went with the app. So our IT department, they've been fairly experienced, fairly good at developing these apps for all our monitoring. It could be charter boat, salmon fishing, whatnot. So they templated it and they developed an app with all our mussel monitoring. And last year was the first year they did it. It took some time to work out some bugs. And with the problems that we've had with some of the staffing issues, IT, our Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife IT department has been hit the hardest. So trying to refill positions has been a struggle. So this year though, we're trying to get our app, and the goal for the app is to go public. So all our co-partners could use it, access the data and whatnot. So we're definitely trying to move forward with that. And if that, hopefully that comes this year, and that'll be a great achievement. And with that was 10 minutes on the spot. Is there
Thanks,
any
Jesse.
questions?
I see a question from Tom Wolf, who's asking eDNA detections last year.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Tom Wolf is asking any interest in DNA detections last year.
So our eDNA, that was a great thing. So right off the bat, I just assumed, I shouldn't assume, we had no detections of anything for dreissenids mussels when it comes to our plankton toes or eDNA samples. And we did a couple years ago, we had the alligator gar that was actually captured, and we conducted eDNA. That was in Lake Wallowa in the Tri-Cities, and we conducted over 20 eDNA samples, and no other alligator gars detections were discovered. And the latest has been this mystery fish that was, it's always the Tri-Cities. It was found around the Tri-Cities in Lake Wallowa again. And that's still undetermined. We're having some difficulty. So the fish was discovered, it was desiccated beyond any visual identification, but the consensus was it was probably one of the 3 species that we have in Washington, which is northern pike, tiger muskie, or grass pickerel. And so we've conducting genetics on them right now, and it's still undetermined. But other than that, as far as crazy or weird eDNA, we don't like crazy or weird. We just like all negatives.
Thanks, Jesse. Presentation. Next up would be from Portland State University.
Hi, everybody. This is Rich Miller, and can you guys see the screen there? And you guys mind forwarding slides?
I can see part of the screen.
Uh-oh. I could try posting from here too, if you want to give me permission. Okay. Can you see a screen here? I'm not.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. And then my presentation, is that up there for you now?
Yes, and I think you need to swap modes there.
Okay.
So Rich, oh yeah.
We all good to go?
You could, Leah, can you direct them to?
Yeah, so at the top of your PowerPoint there where it says display settings, you just, the pull down menu, it says swap, and then it'll just show it instead of presentation or in notes view. There you go. Okay,
great. All right, thank you. And thanks for having me. I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've done at Portland State University. I'm a research technician at Portland State, and I work with Catherine De Rivera and Mark Sitzma, who's retired, but still involved in quite a bit of stuff around there. And the work that we've done has been funded through Bureau of Reclamation, Seattle City Light, Bonneville Power, Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services contributed some, and then a lot of this has been facilitated through Pacific States Marine Fisheries Council. Okay. All right, so the villager surveys that we've did this past year, we focused on mostly high to medium risk water bodies according to the Wells, Cunahan et al. Publication of 2011, at least in Oregon here. 2 of the high risk water bodies we didn't sample for villagers this past year in Oregon. Those were Malheur Reservoir and Warm Springs Reservoir. And partially that was due to low water. A lot of these Eastern Oregon reservoirs have pretty significant drawdown, and with the drought this past year, we had a hard time getting to these water bodies, especially since we weren't able to start our sampling early in June. Several of the medium risk water bodies we also didn't sample. Buckeye Lake, which is a hike-in lake. Heart Lake was super low, and then Man Lake is just out there on its own, and so we weren't able to get down into that part of the state with our personnel. So overall, we collected veliger net tow samples from 50 water bodies using a combination of horizontal, vertical, and stationary collection methods. And we collected up to 4 events per water body per year. The higher risk water bodies we sampled more often. For instance, East Lake and Paulina Lake in Central Oregon are very high calcium, very high usage, so there's a really high risk there. So we went there 4 times this past summer. So overall, we collected 248 total villager samples, a lot of volume into those samples. And the upshot is we found no dreissenid villagers using cross-polarized light microscopy. And Steve Wells at Aquaticus did our analysis of the samples that were submitted. One of the things that we had Steve keep an eye on were Corbicular, juvenile Corbicula in the samples, and they were present in Boundary Reservoir up by the Canadian border, fairly common in the Columbia River and the reservoirs, Snake River and reservoirs, and then several of the Willamette River reservoirs also. We also did put quite a bit of effort into adult surveys. We surveyed 57 water bodies, mostly focused in Oregon itself. Surveyed 139 sampling areas. Those are different areas of each of these different water bodies. We did 193 dock pat downs, which is basically feeling the bottom side of docks. 188 shoreline surveys, which is walking along the shore, turning over rocks, getting as deep in the waters as we could. Collected 172 rake samples, which is basically throwing out a rake, looking at the aquatic plants, putting that into a bucket, rinsing it around, and then pouring the bucket through a sieve and looking for either New Zealand mud snails or any other sort of invasive organism. We collected 48 ponar grab samples, and through all these effort, we found no dreissenid mussels. We did find New Zealand mud snails in Lake Wallula and Lake Umatilla. They're known to be present in those sites. One of the sites, Hat Rock State Park, the New Zealand mud snails were fairly dense. Let me go back here. On those villager surveys, the red dots here, these are sampling areas where we partnered up with Army Corps of Engineers partners for them to collect the data, and Betsy Hull, I believe, will be talking about those samples in a little bit here. So this next year, our plans are to continue to do as much monitoring as possible. Seattle City Light, which funds our work up at Boundary Reservoir on the pond array system, that we're going to continue the same effort that we've done in the past several years, which is getting up there 3 times per year and doing pretty extensive villager tows, shoreline surveys, and artificial substrate surveys. Bureau of Rec, we have funding through Bureau of Rec through 2023. This past year, we weren't able to start our monitoring for that project until later in July, but this year we'll be able to start earlier in June and possibly even in May, depending on what the weather does. But since we got such a late start last year and the water levels were so low, we weren't able to access some of the reservoirs that we were hoping to. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, through the Oregon State Plan, provides some funding and will fill monitoring gaps as needed this summer. WRDA, we've been putting in money proposals to receive that funding. This year we put in a request for a lower amount of funding because we have a limited match availability this year. BPA funds our partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers, sending our partners out sampling equipment and helping them with all their monitoring work. We're hoping to get some money for that this year, but I don't know the update on that right now. Overall, we're going to continue our emphasis on the high and medium risk water bodies and coordinate with and complement efforts with other groups such as Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And just another little note that we have no plans for eDNA sampling this particular year, mostly due to funding issues, and we don't have a lab here that is set up to do the analysis ourselves. So any questions, you can email Kat, or she may be on the call here too, or you can call me or shoot me an email. Thank you.
Rich, we do have a question for you from Steve Bolins.
Sure.
Okay, so Steve asks if you, 1, sample, and 2, did you find any Corbicular juveniles in either Detroit or Cougar reservoirs?
I can look for sure, but I don't remember seeing that. I know Fern Ridge Reservoir, there were some Corbicula in there, and I believe Dexter Reservoir, and let's see, maybe Lookout Point. I'm not sure about that one, but I don't think any of the other Willamette Valley reservoirs had Corbicula in them.
Okay, thank you. I don't.
My name is Betsy Holm, and I'm the Invasive Species Coordinator for Seattle District Army Corps of Engineers. And for those of you who don't know, Seattle District encompasses from Seattle in Washington, northern Idaho, and part of Montana. There's 3 projects in that district that do villager sampling that have the threat of villagers. Chief Joseph Dam in Washington, Albany Falls Dam, where I'm stationed in North Idaho, and then Libby on Lake Kootenai. So what we have here is a map of our project. All the little red squiggles are properties that are owned by the Corps of Engineers, and the little green dots are where we perform villager sampling. The little purple dots are where we perform sampling because we have had Corbicula found in the lake. The little green dot to the farthest to the left of the slide is where Albany Falls Dam is, and we found several Corbicular there a few years ago when we had real high flows, and it was discovered that there was an infestation of Corbicula in Ellisport Bay, which is where the 2 little dots are on the right-hand side of your screen, the 2 little purple dots. And so Christine with the University of Idaho came up, and they did a technique to eradicate those, where they put lime down and put mats down that we held down with sandbags for one summer. And I have not had a villager found since that time, and we have not found any on the ground. We de-water about 11 feet in the wintertime. And so before water up, we kind of look, we haven't found any, but we still actively monitor for them. With the advent of COVID, it's been tough. We generally coordinate our samples with our scientists that come out from Seattle that do other water quality monitoring, and we're part of the Army, Department of Defense, and we had travel restrictions a lot. So we were each project was able to do 2 sampling events last summer. I was hoping we'd be able to gear up more this year, but was told this week we're back to phase 2, which means travel is very restricted. But I'm hoping by summertime it's back up, because normally we do 4 to 5 sampling events each season. So that's Albany Falls. If you want to put up the other one, which is Chief Joseph Dam, and I just asked their natural resource specialist over there that helps with the sampling to send me a map. So his map kind of depicts where they actually do sampling, but also he's put in the little triangles where they have substrates that they monitor. I actually do the sampling at Albany Falls, and so I just do substrate monitoring at our docks and stuff. I didn't put them on my map, but he did his. So we do our sampling events. We send them in to Rich with Portland State, and we had no detections. I don't have a map for Libby. They were unable to get one to me, but they do 2 sampling spots just above the dam, which is the south edge of Lake Koocanusa, and they do 1 sampling event just below the border with Canada. And again, they found nothing. So hopefully this year we'll be back to doing 4 or 5 sampling events over the course of the summer. I can't promise that. And at Albany Falls Dam, we are in the process of rewriting our aquatic programmatic, which allows us to treat in water or bare ground up to 1,000 acres for aquatic plants and other invasives. We're targeting flowering rush and Eurasian water milfoil. It's currently in the BA stage, should be going to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for concurrence here shortly. We've had that type of programmatic for the past 4 years. So with ERDIC sending us money to do flowering rush work, hoping to really look at AquaStrike, a new chemical, and get approval on it, we bumped our programmatic up a year so that we are only bugging the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for concurrence once. And so that's about it for Seattle District.
Thanks, Betsy.
This is Damien. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, I had some technical difficulties. I'm using a TV screen in another area and lost my little bar. So I don't have any slides, but you'll see on Rich Miller's presentation those red dots in Southeast Washington. Those are Walla Walla District, where we sample in McNary Reservoir, or as Jesse calls it, the troublesome Tri-Cities area, with everything that seems to be keep getting found over there. This normally we do every 2 weeks. This year, due to just staffing issues and some funding, we got out pretty much once a month in McNary Reservoir, because that is one of our most heavily active with boat launches and such a close proximity to large urban area and usage. We're taking typically 4 to 6 samples in there. And then in the Lewiston area, which is another major location for recreational boat activities and boat docks that we have up there, we take samples up there, three samples up there. This summer, we did invest with, as you heard Betsy mention, we had some funding sides from the ERDIC side. Our research branch out of Mississippi and Vicksburg did a much more in-depth monitoring survey in McNary Reservoir for flying rush, which of course, for some folks who were on this meeting, who've been in some other meetings, we found a lot more with the drought. Reservoir was down about an additional 3 to 4 feet. So areas kind of, the bathymetry of that reservoir is quite shallow. About a third of it is 20 foot or less. Areas that were, typically 16, 15 feet now, we're in that 13 to 12. Found quite a bit of flying rush, much larger increase in that reservoir. Not good news for us on that matter. And this summer, projections for zebra mussel and quagga mussel monitoring will be the same. Hopefully we can get back to maybe every 2 weeks, but at least we'll do the monthlies and take some samples, which all were non-detects, as you saw in Rich Miller's presentation. We send them to Aquaticus through them, through our coordination with BPA and Portland State University. And that's it, unless there's any specific questions.
Thank you so much, Damien. Any questions?
I don't see any questions for either.
Hold on to Steve.
Okay.
Steve, are you back?
Steve, he should be back in there. Sorry about that, Steve. We'll make you presenter. We'll give this another run.
That's great. Can folks hear me okay?
Yes. And apologies if there was some weird technological thing on my side, but appreciate you sticking with us.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the issue was, but maybe in the interest of time, Leah, if you can just put up my presentation, as long as folks can hear me.
Let's see here.
I can pull it up, Leah, if you
I'm pulling it up. As long as for some reason I have a, sometimes it doesn't display properly on my side. Let's see here.
Or indeed, can folks see my screen now? Because my PowerPoint presentation is up on my screen.
No, we can't see your screen.
Tim, is that something you can throw up quickly here?
I'm trying. It takes a second here.
Sure.
Oh, it's doing the same thing where it's cutting it off.
Give me to try.
If you'd like to, Tim, I'm not sure why it's cutting off on my side. Sorry about that, guys.
We're doing the best we can. And people.
Yes, that looks to be it. Can you put it in full screen mode? That's great. Thanks, Tim and Leah, for your persistence, and thanks to everybody else for patience. So I'm going to talk about Washington State University's early detection monitoring from last year. I want to acknowledge my collaborators, Gretchen Rollwagen-Bolins and Julie Zimmerman in this. Next slide, please. And just to cut right to the chase, we were able to sample at 12 different locations in the lower Columbia River. We sampled biweekly May through October, collected a total of 486 net samples and 144 eDNA samples. Next slide. Next slide, please. And just to show this on a map here, Vancouver, Portland on the far left, and then extending eastward. Next slide, please. And why did we choose these locations? Well, based on some early assessments done by Steve Wells and others, this region of the Columbia River was viewed to be of medium risk of establishment and high risk of introduction. But as we delved into those calcium data, we wanted to collect some of our own observations and see how these compared. Next slide. And we ran some samples through the water chemistry facility at Washington State University in Vancouver. This is a group that's very well situated to run such analyses. If you have needs for water chemistry analyses, you might look into this facility. Next slide. Some new instrumentation has just been purchased by this group, and very importantly, the ICP-MS gives us the calcium data that we were interested in. Next slide. And to make a long story short, we've recently published these results in a short paper entitled "Calcium Concentrations in the Lower Columbia River, USA are generally sufficient to support invasive bivalve spread." And that's kind of the bottom line here. You can take a look at this paper for details. In the interest of time, Tim, I might suggest that we just go past the next two slides. It's detailed data from this manuscript that people can access and explore at their leisure. But the bottom line was that given our data, we established our risk of assessment in this region as follows. Next slide. That the risk of introduction was high given the level of boating and shipping activity here. Next slide. The risk of establishment was at least medium, in some cases higher than that. Next slide. And that the potential economic impacts given hydropower and other infrastructure was extremely high. And next slide. Similarly, the ecological impacts were expected to be extremely high. So this was the basis for our choice of these locations and our sampling regime. Next slide, please. And again, we undertook plankton tows, which were then analyzed with cross-polarized light microscopy, a total of 486 samples. We collected eDNA samples, which were then processed by the USGS Upper Midwest Environmental Laboratory, a total of 144 eDNA samples. And then on a subset of the plankton tow samples, we also analyzed them using the FlowCam video imaging technology. That's a topic for perhaps further discussion. We recently published a paper using this technology. Perhaps at the next meeting, I could go into this in more detail. But suffice it to say now that this is an important supplement for us to apply a entirely separate independent technology to a subset of our plankton tow samples. Next slide, please. And the good news, no detections at any of our sites, at any of our dates, using any of these different techniques. So again, nothing, no positive detections in 2021, consistent with what others have talked about today. Great news for all of us. Next slide, please. I want to draw your attention to a recent paper that our group has published on the feeding dynamics of the Asian clam Corbicular Fluminia. And just to quickly orient you to this slide, on the x-axis is chlorophyll abundance from about 1 to 8 micrograms per liter. And then on the y-axis is the ingestion rate or feeding rate of Corbicula. And going back to the x-axis, these chlorophyll values may not mean much to most of you. So if we could take a quick look at the next slide. Here are results from a paper our group published recently, a long-term data series of chlorophyll in the lower Columbia River, monthly values from January to December on the x-axis, and then abundance of chlorophyll on the y-axis. And that value of about 1 microgram atom per liter is typical in late autumn, early winter on the far right of this figure. But the higher values of 8 or 10 are quite common in spring and early summer in the Columbia River. So if we can go to the next slide, please. What this figure on the ingestion rate of Corbicula shows is that even at low levels of chlorophyll, such as occur in the winter, Corbicula has a positive feeding rate. They're feeding probably just enough to eke by, but that in spring and summer, when chlorophyll levels are higher at around 8 microgram atoms per liter, even higher, Corbicula is feeding at a very, very high rate and is growing and reproducing at this time of year. The reason I show this is to put a plug in for those of us doing the monitoring to make ancillary measurements of other environmental variables as well. In the case of chlorophyll, our values are based on water samples that are collected, filtered, and then chlorophyll is extracted and fluorometrically determined. But for others of us, even just having a fluorometer on your data sonde as you're taking measurements of water temperature, pH, et cetera, these chlorophyll data can help us interpret the monitoring data and indeed risk of assessment. This, of course, is for Corbicula, but I would argue that having similar data would help us in evaluating the risks of dreissenids as well. Next slide, please. And so the question that we were posed was what went well and what difficulties did we encounter? And the good news is that now that we've been doing this for several years, we're really a well-oiled machine, and they have no problems at all. We were slowed down a bit in 2020 with the onset of COVID, but of course we've adapted to that. So 2021 went on without a hitch, and we expect very much the same thing going forward. Next slide, or indeed that may have been it. So with that said, I'm happy to entertain any questions that folks have.
Great, thanks. Do you see any questions, Leah?
I do not see any questions. And then also to that end, I have been communicating with Heidi with the Bureau, and she's going to consolidate her presentation too after our break, because she's talking then as well, if that works.
And Robin, do you have a brief update on the monitoring? Oops, you're muted.
Robin, it looks like you're still, we still can't hear you.
Me now.
Now we can hear you. That's weird. I'm like, we heard you perfectly this morning.
So many mute buttons that I can press. Really exciting. And they're all placed like right where you hold your headphones. All right, so on to the dreisenid monitoring map here. For those of you who may be new to the monitoring mapping portion, I'm going to give just a really quick overview of the regional mapping effort, the timing of the monitoring data call, and then walk really with more emphasis through sort of 2021, 2022 planning here. So this is the static map here for demonstration purposes. Like all good things in the world of aquatic invasive species, this map lives on the Western AIS webpage. And it's great because you can get an overview year to year. You can sort by type of monitoring. And then each one of these sample points comes with some selected data about the sampling effort at that particular location. Now, this is the public-facing map. There's also a password-protected map where managers can access data if they need to do a deep dive into any particular sampling effort here. You'll also note that while the emphasis of this map is on the Columbia River Basin, we've clearly attempted to collect data from as much of the west of the Rockies as we can. The one unusual outlier here is that Nevada has chosen to not participate in our mapping effort multiple years in a row. But other than that, we do have a pretty good amount of coverage for the West. I will note that we do not include on this particular map with each of these sampling points the results of the monitoring effort. So this is just yes or no, what did monitoring occur at this location, and then what type of monitoring took place in terms of sample type. So where is the map for 2021, you may ask? And we don't have it up yet, and that's really because of a variety of reasons, primarily timing. Back when this effort started, we were putting out a data call in mid-October, hoping to get everyone's sampling data in terms of monitoring locations by the beginning of November. For a variety of reasons, we've been pushing that later and later so that the call goes out early November in the hopes of getting it before the US Thanksgiving holiday. And because of a variety of reasons, but perhaps overwhelmingly climate related, folks have been sampling longer and longer. The sampling windows have been getting bigger, more locations are being sampled. There may be other weather factors, droughts, wildfires, etc., that cause that to happen. But multiple partners this year were actually sampling well into November. But that does put us in a really tricky position data-wise, because there are a bunch of winter holidays, school outages, vacations, whatnot, that really make it difficult for us to not only receive data from our partners, but then turn it around and get it into a map in time for this winter meeting. So going forward, I think we are definitely going to have to look at timing. This is the second year in a row we haven't been able to get the map out in January for folks. So there's a couple of considerations in terms of when should we do this and when do folks really need to be able to see this information if they use it to determine some of their monitoring opportunities or asks. So this is probably a great topic for our next remote monitoring meeting. And some of the things that we should look at for future discussion that I'm proposing are selecting that timing of the 2022 data call, revisiting some of our data collection goals and the roles of the submitting entity. For example, many states collect all of the sampling effort that is being done in their state to the best of their ability. So they have partners that they collect data from. Not everyone does that. So are we really getting an accurate picture? If one were to look to select a state or a province and say, hey, I want to see all of the monitoring that's going on here. It's definitely past time to do a new introduction to that public facing monitoring map. And in order to do that, it would probably be great for us to really determine who our audience is and what our communication goals are there when we get started for that. So that's what I have. Let me know if you have any questions. There's my contact information there if you need to get a hold of me, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Robin. That brings us to the end of the agenda. And we look forward to getting everybody in the next session. Apologies for having it go on, but I appreciate everybody sharing so much information. Leah, do you want to wrap it up real quick?
Only to just give people a little time check. Obviously, we got a little bit behind schedule, but I think with this break, we'll be able to get back on track. So let's meet back here at 15 minutes before the hour. So that would be 12:45 Pacific and then 1:45 Mountain Time, depending on where you are. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll start back up with the full Columbia River Basin team meeting here shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
You ready?
Live. Yeah.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the Columbia River Basin team of the 100th Meridian Initiative. I'm Stephen Phillips with the Pacific Statesman Fisheries Commission. First want to thank the Bonneville Power Administration and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for funding this event. We've got a short afternoon session today, and then we'll be back at it again tomorrow. Leah's put up the agenda. Let's see, I wanted to mention, if you weren't on this morning, that this marks the 20th year that we've had Columbia River Basin team meetings. I believe our first meeting was in Boise in 2002, so time flies. So welcome everyone, and I'll turn it over to Leah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stephen. I'm sure many of you were with us this morning. So, but just to reiterate, please put your questions in the question box, and we will do our best to get all those addressed as we can with the time permitted. And with that, so this afternoon we have a lot of review from many of our federal and state and provincial partners. So with that, I will turn the presentation time over first to Teresa Thome with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And Teresa.
Hopefully you can hear me and see me.
Yes, I can.
Yay, all right. Woohoo! So I have an update for you all from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, really with a regional focus. And so I'm going to have some funding updates, talk a little bit about our horizon scanning results, eDNA monitoring at our hatcheries, a little bit of an update on our YY brook trout, and then a European green crab update, and the mossball response update. Susan Pasco will be providing that tomorrow. Just funding update, we're currently trying to understand how much money will be coming to the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Department of Interior in the Infrastructure Act has $100 million tied to invasive species work over 5 years. And so we're just seeing how the invasive species priorities and some of the discussions that we've been having at the department level will hopefully translate into funding coming to our different agencies in the department. And Hillary Smith probably will give some updates as well. In FY21, we did have an increase in our funding to our state ANS management plans, almost at 100K to each state with an approved management plan, and also the QZAP funds coming to Fish and Wildlife Service was also increased to 2.25 million. And although we're still in a continuing resolution for this current fiscal year, FY22, we're hoping that those same levels of funding will be consistent. We do have an interagency agreement that is managed through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through Region 2. Barack helps coordinate that and is the manager on that agreement, and it is an interagency with the Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, and the National Park Service. And again, that is trying to streamline and have more consistent funding for some of our mussel work. That is funding some of the watercraft inspection training as well as the watercraft inspection database. And so that's multi-agencies helping support that. And then in FY21, we did provide some Fish and Wildlife Service funds to the USGS to highlight European green crab and also rusty crayfish and flowering rush. All right, so going on to some of our results for horizon scanning. Again, this has been a kind of a year-long effort looking at invasive species that may be newly introduced or could become introduced to the Pacific Northwest and the risk they might pose of possibly becoming widespread. And so this was really an effort, not just in our region, but other places, to be a little bit more proactive on what invasives we might expect to see. And there's a component of climate matching to this work. And again, these regional horizon scanning efforts are kind of in line with other work going on. USGS is in the process of conducting a national horizon scan, but focused on a pathway of organisms and trade. The regional horizon scans that the Fish and Wildlife Service kind of championed were done focused on multiple different pathways. Just wanted to let you know too that University of Florida looked at a very broad horizon scan for many different pathways, and it was a very large pool of taxa, including aquatic and terrestrial vertebrates, invertebrates, and plants. And then there's been some work in tandem with that through the National Academy of Sciences focused on the Gulf Coast, except Florida, knowing that the Florida work was going on. So all of these different horizon scans are really giving us a lot of information on the risk that these new species potentially could pose.
a little bit more specific on the regional horizon scanning, you can see the difference between the regions, but the Pacific Northwest, the Southeast, Alaska, and also the Great Lakes, this work has been going on. And again, I want to mention, this is not like a one and done kind of a project. This was for all of these, we hope, the Fish and Wildlife Service hopes to really prioritize horizon scanning, not just once in a while, but to have this on a consistent schedule so that we can look at multiple pathways and add additional taxa. We were lucky in our region. We had a very broad group of participants who supported this work. And we looked at several different families of aquatic plants. That was in the scoping, the scoping participants wanted to focus more specifically on aquatic plants, and this was just as well submerged aquatic, emergent aquatic, and fully I mean the whole suite of different aquatic plants. So it wasn't just I mean, it was trying to be as broad as possible, but not overwhelming. And just to provide a little bit more data, looking at the pathway for recreational boats, we were very thankful for all of our state partners who were able to contribute their boat inspection information of the sources of boats coming into the Pacific Northwest. So I just want to highlight, like, the work that you all do with boat inspection helped inform our horizon scanning work of where we may expect to see, at least from recreational boats, where we might be getting things. So these were the top resources or top areas that boats were coming into the Pacific Northwest, and then the component of climate matching of areas that had high climate match compared to the Pacific Northwest. Again, just to highlight the process that we went through was, having this regional advisory group of the participants of the slide I already showed. The pathway for our case for the Pacific Northwest is just that this first time really focused on recreational boating. Our geographic region was the Pacific Northwest, and our focal taxa were aquatic plants broadly. So then our next step was to generate some species lists. So we looked at the top donor regions by that pathway of recreational boating, and then did the climate match, and then looked at what species occurrence do we know about, and verifying those species. And those species may or may not even occur yet in North America, but that was the goal, was to develop a prioritized species list and then look at the risk posed by those species. So I'll click through this kind of fast, but this was kind of the flow chart of the different taxa, the valid species, ones that were not yet present in the Pacific Northwest, if they had any kind of known history of introduction in other places, just to get an idea of what help us to prioritize risk assessment and risk screening. And so ultimately, when we're looking at high risk for becoming introduced or established in our region from this pathway, we're looking at 6 species present on at least 4 continents, and then 1 species that we added. And really specifically to our region, there were definitely 5 plants that really came out as being high risk. Oops. Let's see. Okay, so now what do we do with that? Now the next steps are developing some fact sheets for those 5 species, and working with you all on this call, and are also probably the state USDA offices for working to designate some of these aquatic plants, if they aren't already, getting them on noxious weed lists or high priority species lists to prohibit importing or moving them around, and developing some different training resources on how to identify or detect these species, and even working with USGS to provide some profile pages or ways to report them should they be found. So those are some of the next steps that we're working on. Okay, shifting from horizon scanning to our eDNA monitoring. I just wanted to highlight that we did conduct eDNA testing in FY21 for New Zealand mud snail, quagga and zebra mussel, northern pike, and Asian carp. And this was done at our national fish hatcheries. And then in FY22, we were able to get internal service funding to test a portable PCR unit for real-time eDNA sampling. We are also continuing our work on using YY brook trout stocking in a way to help remove brook trout, whether they become established in Tyee Springs. And so this work has been kind of a long process, but it's ongoing. And then I just wanted to highlight that several of our national wildlife refuges are doing ongoing monitoring and removal of European green crab, and helping with some funding to do green crab monitoring and control. And then just again, a little public service announcement is that the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force has asked that the European green crab control plan be updated. And I am very privileged to get a chance to work with Ted Grolschultz on working on a working group to update that plan. So that will be going forward in 2022, and we hope to have that completed in 2023. And I think we'll be looking toward QZAP and how the priorities are listed out in that document to help guide a more useful control plan for European green crab. And Tim Cunahan helped us with, looking at European green crab, and several others contributed a lot of data and information to look at more efficient trapping or use of our trapping and monitoring for European green crab across the Pacific Northwest. And Tim is going to be the best person to ask. I asked him to provide a couple slides. So just to highlight the assessment and the needs, just looking at all the data that have been collected already and what's going to be the most effective ways to detect European green crab, and our trapping efforts needed to keep doing this work. So I know that was fast. I don't want to have us go too long today, but there's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. I don't see any questions for you. Let me double check here. We'll move on. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much, Teresa. Let's see, Heidi McMaster. It looks like Heidi, you've joined just as a call-in, so you can unmute yourself and then just chat. So Heidi McMaster with the Bureau of Reclamation.
Can you hear me?
I can. Hi.
All
Thanks
right.
for joining us.
Hi. And I do not have any slides at this point. And I apologize. I'm actually in New Orleans doing disaster relief work with the Army Corps of Engineers following Hurricane Ida. Shameless, I forgot about this meeting. So I've pulled together information with the help of my trusty colleagues to give a brief update. So as for monitoring, we were able to complete monitoring on 35 reservoirs in the Pacific Northwest at 57 unique sample locations. And we do not have all of the data for it, but the bottom line is we didn't have any detections, whether or not it was eDNA or other. So that's always good news that we can have and share. We do plan on maintaining the same level of sampling effort from our lab, and that even though we do have a little bit of a budget shortfall, we're pulling together some funding from other parts of our budget in order to continue our level of effort. So that's the brief monitoring update. Some of the bigger news that most of our partners like to hear is our grant funding efforts. And this year for FY22, we were able to award, or we are in the process of awarding 6 more grants to Pacific Northwest. And it's approximately $1.2 million will go out to continue with monitoring efforts, as well as check stations such as in Washington. So we're able to maintain our level of funding where we anticipated it was going to dwindle this year. We are going to keep up we're going to try to do a rigorous application of our grants this year, and because we've been struggling with short-staffed and how to deal with the COVID protocols at work. So now we're hoping that we've managed to balance it out and everybody is on board with trying to get these awarded earlier in the year. And that is the major big things. I know we have a lot of work going on. We have a new protocol for the Pacific Northwest Reclamation for notification of any mussel detections. And so that's been shared as well as it tied into our reclamation notification protocol. And we will continue working and making sure that it meets or matches our state partner and the CRB notification, how all that works. So aside from that, I don't have anything else, but I'm happy to entertain any questions that might come up on the fly that I might not have addressed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Heidi. If you have a question for Heidi, I would encourage you to pop that in there. We'll wait a second to let it kind of come through.
And I'm always available by email if anybody has any follow-up questions or whatnot. I will be returning to my desk on January 29th. Well, it's a Saturday, but if anybody's been trying to get in touch with me, I apologize. I'm a little behind we're working 12-hour days, 7 days a week on housing assistance. So I'm trying to catch up and do what I can in between.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions for you. Well, okay, wait, sorry. Jonas has, I think it's probably trying to get at your detail here. So Jonas Grundman with the Army Corps asked, what FEMA mission are you supporting with the Army Corps?
It's the Hurricane Ida disaster relief. I'm on the housing assistance portion with the St. Paul district.
Okay. All right. Well, Heidi, I don't see any additional questions for you. I appreciate you joining us and sharing what you know, despite the fact that you're on the details. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I apologize for not passing off to somebody to do this for me that would be better prepared. But I was originally supposed to come back on the 1st of January, but I was requested to extend, and it's been a little crazy. So I apologize for that.
That's okay. We made it work today. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. So let's see. So we do have another federal partner update from kind of more of the Department of Interior from Hillary Smith, but that will be after kind of in closing. I just not sure what a version of the agenda folks have open. So now we're going to shift to the Army Corps of Engineers, and Jonas is going to be sharing his screen here momentarily. So,
All right, we're sharing. Let's see. And I'll flip this around. Are you guys seeing it so far? I'm switching views right now.
yep, so far so good, Jonas.
Excellent. Okay, so I just wanted to ask Heidi that question because I've supported a couple of those hurricane relief efforts throughout the years. And,
That's good.
it's very rewarding and it's very needed. So thank you very much. So my name is Jonas Grundman. You guys probably know Damian Walters a little bit better. He's been more involved in these programs. I came on roughly a year ago to help support some of the APC cost share work, as well as work with Jeremy Crossland out of the headquarters office, just getting some policy stuff internally updated as well. So I'm kind of in a temporary position at this moment in time. It's not to exceed 4 years. I normally work out of our Omaha district office. I've formerly done invasive species work, our 408 program, a smattering of other things. But so that's me in a nutshell. And the last thing I'll say before I really dive into it is that I apologize. I really need to up my PowerPoint game because the previous slide decks here have been much more entertaining than mine's about to be. So hopefully my voice will keep you entertained and going, but visually might be lacking a little bit. All right. Just real quick, I just wanted to touch, for those who maybe not be familiar, I'm going to go over it really quick, just kind of what the cost share program is, how the Corps of Engineers implements it, give a very brief history on the legislation. I think it's something that's probably been presented before to most individuals, so I'll skip over it. I'm always happy to talk about it in more depth offline or separately or in the Q&A. Talk a little bit about it, kind of like the funding history that we've seen through the program as it's expanded. Then kind of talk about current status and where we're at with the expansion, and really focus as much as I can on the Columbia River Basin. And then hopefully have room for Q&A. And then I think Damian's going to tag on to the end of this, and he's got some updates on flowering rush. So this is all stuff I think everyone in this group knows. But what I like to try and explain is that, we got these authorities originally for the cost share program in 2014, and the program has expanded significantly in subsequent worded authorizations. So, we're experiencing those growing pains that come along with that. So, we're potentially now operating within 18 states in 10 Corps of Engineers districts, and that's like within 3 major subordinate commands to our division office. So, that requires not only internally with the Corps a need for consistency and implementation, a lot of communication and coordination, but also, of course, with our state partners and other federal partners. So if anybody's not aware, this is a 50-50 reimbursable cost share program. It is not a grant funded program. And we're really here to kind of help bolster non-federal interests, so state watercraft inspection programs. That can include monitoring, it can include rapid response. And really, this last one on the objective, this changed in WRDA 2020. Previously, it was very focused on protecting Corps of Engineers assets. WRDA 2020 changed that language for the criteria for inspection stations. That we're really just trying to keep stuff in or out of the waters of the United States. So it's a little bit new, but that's, I think, going to expand how we look at the program from the Corps of Engineers side. So how do we manage the program? Typically, they tagged this authority onto a previous authority, and that had sort of not been utilized in a while. So typically, we don't submit through the presidential budget process a line item for this program. Congress has been adding that every year through the Appropriations Acts and providing guidance on how we should implement. As far as leadership level, how we go about this, headquarters, because this started in the Columbia River Basin, designated Walla Walla, or NWD, our Northwestern Division, as the lead, and then Walla Walla picked it up as the district office to actually carry it forward. We provide, Walla Walla provides like QA support. They're kind of like the contracting agent, so they're going to sign all the agreements, pay the invoices. And through our expansion basins outside of the Columbia River, the lead district in that area typically takes the lead for compliance. They'll be your primary point of contact if you're in one of those states. They provide a lot of quality assurance, quality control work. But at the end of the day, documents are signed at Walla Walla. Just a real quick 6-step process. I'm not going to go into depth here, but just to kind of highlight the steps. Item number 2 here is the one that seems to take the most amount of time and the most amount of effort. Like I said, we're operating within a lot of different districts and division offices. Approval for the letter report is at our headquarters office. So as that moves up and needs to be circulated, there's just a lot of checks and a lot of reviews. And so that process takes more time than I think most people would like to get that initiated. Once we're over that hurdle, then we're into like some of the easier steps. We sign our agreement, which is basically the contract with the non-federal interest, develop a work plan with them, kind of develop a statement of work, which summarizes everything that's happening in that basin. And then we are working on invoicing and payments. So you can kind of see that those last 3 steps, those are going to occur annually. The first 3 steps, that's usually one time or as needed if we get a significant change in authority. We might need to readdress our environmental compliance. So just real quick on how the program has expanded. 2014, this was kind of like our area of operation. This is actually a little bit bigger. We were just operating within the watershed and within the 4 northwestern states. That expanded in 2016 to add, I might have this a little wrong, but that was expanded eventually to include Wyoming and Nevada, as there are portions that touch the Columbia River Basin there. 2018, we got a really big bump in authority through WRDA, and you can see it significantly expanded the geographic scope of that program. So now we're operating in pretty much every state west of the Missouri line there. And then again in 2020, more authority. We're now using the Russian River Basin in California, and this also adds the U.S.-Canada border region, which we're still evaluating on how we're going to implement that. It could be an international cost share. We could just be bolstering state efforts all along the northern border. We're looking for clarification, and that's one of my focuses here with working with Jeremy Crossland out of headquarters. Funding. So I know we got a lot of other federal employees on. Everybody knows the difference, I think, between an authorization and an appropriation. But authorization, the reason I have this slide is just to show what the congressional intent has been with this program. And you can see that on the authorization side, the money keeps growing with each WRDA, which is encouraging. It means that they understand that this is going to take some effort. On the very right-hand side, you can kind of see the river basin split as Congress has directed it. Moving into the appropriation side, obviously, those are always smaller numbers. But you can see that the program, it's grown in that kind of middle column total APC appropriation. Gone from 9 million originally, which was 5 million for the cost share, up to 11 to 12, 6 each year for the cost share. And in FY21, APC total program had 25 million, 18 million of that was directed towards the cost share program. 15 for watercraft inspection stations, 3 million for monitoring related to those stations and rapid response. An interesting note for that fiscal year 21 appropriation is that Congress directed us to split those funding sources equally between the 3 line items in WRDA, which is Columbia River Basin is one, Upper Missouri River Basin is a second one, and the 3rd line item there encompasses Upper Colorado, South Platte, and the Arkansas River Basin. So that 15 million goes 555 across those. We're expecting very similar funding levels for fiscal year 22. I just looked at the draft language in the Senate, which obviously we're still in continuing resolution, but I looked at the draft language earlier this week, and it looks about the same. Looks like there's $1 million plus up for research and development. All right. Yeah, for watercraft inspection stations, this is primarily the only cost share we have in place currently on the ground funding things is in the Columbia River Basin. So this is focused on that. But you can see that, the obligations and the expenditures have been creeping up each year, which is good. It means we're doing more work and we're getting more done. We're putting more money out there to help support. Similar kind of story for the AIS monitoring effort. So here's where we're at currently. Like I said, the only active cost share in this program right now is within the Columbia River Basin. We work through, as all of you are aware, I think, through Pacific States Marine Fishery Commission, and they have sub-agreements with each of the participating states. So Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, we are in the process of adding Wyoming and Nevada. Those documents for finalization are with our division and headquarters for final review. So I'm excited to say that that should be turning around pretty soon, hopefully. But it includes language for rapid response and monitoring. We'll need to amend that cost share agreement when we get the final approval there, and then we'll just have to sign an updated FONSI or a supplemental FONSI for the program. Expansion basins, kind of a similar story. The letter reports are with our division office for policy review, which is one of the final steps. We're hoping to have that complete by February or the end of February. And then remaining tasks, we will have to get those letter reports approved by headquarters. Then we need to sign the PPAs, annual work plan, scope of work, and then start putting money on the ground. Arkansas River Basin had a little bit of a slow start. There were some issues in the language in the initial authority that called it the Arizona River Basin in 2018. So that was modified in 2020. So we've had a little slow start getting them up and running. Russian River Basin was authorized in 2020. That district, San Francisco, I think. San Francisco district really jumped on it, took a lead, and got moving on the letter report early. So we're thinking that we may have that complete by the end of the fourth quarter, which means fiscal year 23, we should be putting money on the ground there. And I kind of mentioned the US-Canada border region authorization. We're really looking for clarification and trying to figure out the best way to approach that authority. Damien, maybe we just move over you to Flowering Rush and then open for questions.
All right, go ahead, go to the next slide, Jonas. So Flowering Rush, this is the Pike plant control program, which has been authorized since 1958. Some minor updates since then, but pretty much since '96 was not funded. This goes through a lot of the same steps and process that you heard Jonas talk about, where the federal interest, the cost efficiency, basically generate letter report on it, all that through the process. Currently, we do have that on the ground for this last year. Again, thanks to PSMFC and Stephen Phillips and those folks. They're administering that for us in the annual agreements. Next slide. So this was, approved, like I said, just this past spring. It's roughly about 300K. I think it's primarily out of Washington and some Montana work, but it's, for all four of the states. Did want to note here, I did get an update because this is a nationwide program. So this is for any of the states across the U.S. And it was $1 million was appropriated 3 years ago. So Buffalo District in New York, they have Flowering Rush back there. They did about 50K's worth of work last year. We'll be doing the same this upcoming year. So it's not just specific to basins. It's actually just, like I said, across the nation. So in essence, it is a smaller pot of money when you think of that across 50 states. Same process though, basically a signed agreement. We get basically an annual work plan for that. Perform ESA and NEPA if it's outside or there's new locations found at Flowering Rush. When you're looking across, because it's, like I said, not by basin, it's any place where Flowering Rush is found. It's also for monitoring survey work, so that's some of the effort that like Oregon can do in water bodies. But this is also off all federal lands, so that's another piece to remember, that this is that cost share for those control activities or survey work that are off federal lands that are managed. And I think that's the last slide. Go one more, Jonas. I think that's the last one.
Yeah, it's just a second behind. But yep.
No Flowering Rush in this picture, just mussels. So the mussels eradicated Flowering Rush for us. No, just kidding. Any questions?
That's great, you two. Thank you. Some really great information shared. If you have any questions, okay, wait, so I have one that's come through here. So Tammy Davis is asking, is there any information on funding for Alpine Lakes monitoring? I'm not sure if that applies under the WRDA. That was the intent. Do you guys have any comments with that question?
All I can say is I remember seeing some language somewhere specific to alpine water, alpine lake monitoring, but it was not specific to the cost share program. So I don't
Okay.
remember what that authority entailed or where it sat.
Leah,
Yeah, well, and Tammy said yes under order. Yes, Stephen.
I believe that's Fish and Wildlife Service managed at Alpine
Okay.
Lake.
Okay.
I could add to that. This is Teresa,
Go ahead, Teresa.
if you can. Yeah, so that it was under WRDA, there was a pilot program for Alpine Lakes. And it was supposed to be a grant program, but there was no funding. It was authorized to be there, but there were no appropriations tagged to it. So that didn't go forward.
Okay, thanks for that additional information, Teresa. Let's see, I'm just going to go in order here. Nick wants to know where this picture was taken. That's being.
I can answer that. This is from a colleague of mine in Texas with the Corps when they had the flooding that they had a couple years back in some of the water bodies where they had mussels, zebra mussels. The parks were flooded completely underwater for almost about a whole year. And when it drained down, they thought they'd be moving mud. And this was basically concrete picnic tables and stuff and slabs that basically the mussels had developed on just in that time frame. So instead they were scraping and removing structures.
All right, from Texas. All right, I do have a question here for you guys too from Kate Wilson. She asks, what if one of the WRDA regions doesn't spend the full 5 million? Does it become available for other basins, or is that still in the works?
Damien, you may have a better take on this one than I do, but I'll attempt an answer first. Oh, go ahead. Yep.
Good.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, that funding split was new in FY21, and we didn't run into that issue. We are evaluating how we would conduct that, but essentially, we think if a state is not going to reach the end of those dollars, and we know that, and like we're getting estimates through their annual work plan, that's kind of the agreement up front, how much we're going to cost share. So if there's money on the table, we think we have the flexibility to move that within those basins. Damien, does that track with your understanding?
Yes, that's what we're hoping. I mean, definitely money prior to when Congress split it out by appropriation. We don't have any of that restriction. And our belief is that it's the overall APC, but we would still have to, I'd say, formalize and finalize that. But that's the game plan.
All right, guys. I don't see any more questions coming in. Super. Well, I guess we are going to move on then. Thank you so much for sharing your information. Okay, so next on our list here, we're going to get some state, provincial, and tribal updates. So we're going to go to Martina. Okay, hold on a second, folks. Hang.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great.
I can hear you.
Martina, you're just doing a verbal presentation, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, super. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon. I'm Martina Beck, invasive fauna unit head with the BC Ministry of Environment, and I'm just going to give a quick update on our invasive mussel defense program, our watercraft inspection station program, and a quick recap from our 2021 season. Unfortunately, I don't have a PowerPoint. It'll just be a quick verbal update, and I'm not going to share my camera because we've been having a lot of connection issues over the last day or two. So recapping our 2021 season, we had just over 33,000 total inspections at our watercraft inspection stations. And we had, of those, 244 were identified as high risk for either dreissenid mussels or other aquatic invasive species, or not found to be clean, drain, dry. And of those total inspections, we had 17 mussel-fouled boats that were intercepted last season. And so our inspection stations were operating from April 1st to late October last year. And we, of course, had some adjustments, and that happened throughout the season. Partway through, we, of course, saw some of the US-Canada border restrictions lifting. So we had some ability with, we did have a roving inspection crew in our Okanagan region, as well as in our lower mainland, that allowed us to kind of adjust and adapt as those border crossings started to open up a little bit. We also continue to work with our Canadian Border Service Agency, our border officers, to receive notifications of when watercraft are coming through our at the international US-Canada border. So we receive notifications from them, so that continues. And we also, of course, are always very appreciative of all the notifications that we get from all of our neighboring and partner Western states and provinces and beyond. And in terms of our the upcoming 2022 season, we're still very much in the planning stages for that. Our conservation officers service leads the hiring and training of our AIS inspectors, and they're just currently in the process. We had the posting for our inspector positions. That posting ran in basically for the month of December, and now just starting to do the planning for interviewing and for those positions. I think, as many other state and provincial programs encountered last year, we certainly had challenges with hiring and I would say keeping and retaining those EIS inspector positions, keeping them filled. So certainly we'll see what 2022 brings in terms of how it looks for hiring and filling our positions, and still in those kind of planning stages, and obviously seeing what contingency plans we may need to have depending on how things progress with the ongoing pandemic, and whether that impacts our ability to do full in-person training or whatnot. We'll just be kind of establishing different options as we look to do that in the spring. So I think I will probably leave it there.
Excellent. Thank you, Martina. If you have a quick question for Martina, now's your chance. Otherwise, we will just move to our next presenter. Okay, I don't see any questions for you, Martina. Thank you. So next we have Chris Shelton from Oregon Fish and Wildlife. Chris, if you want to go ahead and unmute, if you want to also show your webcam, if you'd like, that's up to you.
Doesn't matter to me. Yeah, I guess. Why not? So I'm Chris Shelton. I'm the lead tech with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's Invasive Species Program. Pretty slow year for us out here in Oregon. We're kind of chalking that up just to low water levels and COVID keeping people off the water. Just kind of quickly touch on monitoring. This year we sampled 15 sites along the lower Willamette River, and then from Bonneville Pool up to the McNary Pool, and recorded 232 samples from those 15 sites, and they all came back negative, of course. In terms of watercraft inspections, We ran our usual 6 inspections this year, our 6 inspection stations. Ashland, Ontario are open year round, minus a couple holidays here and there. Other than that, we have check stations in Klamath Falls, Lakeview, and Brookings that we keep open from May until mid-September. And then we had our Umatilla station open from May until about the middle of October. Between the 6 stations, we inspected just under 20,000 vessels this year and intercepted 11 that had quagga or zebra mussels on them, and another 228 vessels with other types of biofouling. Kind of a big thing for us. For the first time this year, Oregon State Police cited a commercial hauler for transporting a prohibited species. Apparently the hauler was informed by an inspector with Idaho that he had mussels on the watercraft, and then our inspectors at our Ontario station saw the hauler bypass and had OSP chase him down and took care of it. During the winter time frame from November to March last year, Ashland, Ontario inspected about 1,500 watercraft and intercepted 3 vessels that had quagga and zebra mussels, and another 19 that had other types of biofouling. Yeah, that's about all I got for 2022. Again, Ashland, Ontario are going to be open for the entire year, and we're planning on opening Brookings, Klamath Falls, Lakeview, and Umatilla towards the end of April, kind of beginning of May, sometime in there. So hopefully we can get it staffed. We've got a pretty high turnaround this year, so yeah, get it going and see what we can do this year. That's all I got, short and sweet.
Great, thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Just checking here to make sure there aren't any quick questions. Okay. All right, so moving right along, we are going to go to the Idaho Department of Agriculture. Nick, there you are again.
Here I am.
Do you need to share your screen or no?
Yes.
You would like to share, okay.
Just so they can see a few graphics as I walk through this. This one's always tricky to keep on schedule.
This update?
Show my screen. Yeah, I mean, five minutes to tell the story is always tricky. Can you see that?
Yes, I can. That's good.
There. Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, Nick Zerflu, Department of Agriculture. Once again, we're tasked with rolling out the invasive species program in Idaho. I get the privilege today of kind of telling the story, you know, of a lot of people doing really good work in Idaho. So typically we, you know, we'll have full-time staff around the state, you know, about 10, 12 people, but in the summer months during the boating season, when the inspection stations are open, we'll hire on, you know, between the state department and our cooperators, a couple hundred seasonal staff that are really the ones driving this program. The boots on the ground get the work done, and so it's pretty cool to tell their story. So this is the prevention arm focused on watercraft inspection. I went ahead and added in product inspection just because of the Marimo mothballs, but we'll be talking about that later on in the CRB meeting. Just an overview, the inspection stations are positioned around the state, similar to other states. 13th year of the program. This year we inspected about 114,000 watercraft. Out of that, 52 of them were mussel-fouled boat, and 24 of those were destined to Idaho. So there's 18 stations, 10 cooperators, and I'll have a slide specific to them. And then we continued the night operations. We explore, you know, just how far we can push the boundaries on our season duration, starting earlier, ending later, and then the law enforcement component, of course, for compliance. You know, I can't speak enough to our station cooperators. Some of these stations we operate ourselves through the state and we hire on staff, and then some of them will reach out to a local entity to take it on. And so you can see them scattered throughout the state. Many of them attend the CRB meetings, and so it's good to have their voice here, and you can see where they're at. Law enforcement support, very similar cooperative agreement, a little bit different heartbeat. Obviously, this is for boater safety and compliance, being similar to the story in Oregon for bypass and getting compliance as far as people stopping. So it's Idaho State Police as well as the associated counties where the stations are located, and we have great support from our law enforcement throughout the state. I want to talk just briefly on site improvements. You know, last few years we've really turned the corner on getting established and having some great capital improvements and resources out there to work with. I believe all stations really have some sort of modular office or a shed to work out of. Most of them, if not all of them, have electrical utilities and HVAC, things like that. And what that really does for you is to help retain staff and keep them safe and comfortable and able to work in their environment. It can really go a long ways. And then you can see the other things that we're working on there, of course, is we're trying to be better at what we do. So just real quick on the volume of watercraft we're inspecting over the years, you can see that the early years, this was before I was around the program, but you can see the level at which we were operating. And then again, this kind of speaks to the funding and WRDA and the things that we talked about earlier in the call with Pacific States and Army Corps of Engineers is Idaho has a very diverse funding source. So it's on the state side, it's general fund and it's dedicated fund from the user fee. On the federal family side, of course, we've got WRDA, which, you know, you can see the jump of inspections, you know, in the 2017, 2018 timeframe. So that's really a lot to deal with WRDA and nighttime and expansion in the program. And then we also have some other federal grants through the Fish and Wildlife Service or through the BLM or Forest Service to help out in other aspects of the program as well. You know, with that, just a little bit on funding is you got to be cognizant of where those state funds are coming from and how they're being utilized, because at some point you may have to use those as match. And so, you know, as oftentimes we see these big numbers come into the programs as far as level of funding, you know, but that might not always relate to just expansion in programs. You're going to have some other funding to help match. And I think you heard earlier from the Corps about that 50-50 match with WRDA, and that comes into play definitely in that discussion. But so you know, in this chart, you can see kind of where we've been at, and last year wasn't as busy as 2020. I think that was just a year to put in the history books as far as recreation use and that story. But you know, you can see we're very active. A lot of this information is, as well as previous years, are available online, so you can access a data dashboard that helps pull information. If not, if you're looking for something, you know, specific, just let me know and we can help answer that question if we can. This data really helps us know what's going on as far as the boating season, early season, the peak of the boating season between Memorial Day and Labor Day here in Idaho is typically where we see that, and obviously it peaks around 4th of July, and then it kind of teeters off into the fall as kids go back to school, and typically in Idaho boats are being winterized, that sort of thing. Just to show you where boaters are coming from, we asked their zip code. This is zip code on the map, so you can see we're inspecting watercraft from all over North America, which is pretty cool. And then we also hone in on risk, and so we ask, you know, where are boaters coming from? This is water body specific. Just due to the proximity to the state, most of the boaters are coming from Idaho and the Pacific Northwest, but you can see the lower Colorado there in the Midwest and the Great Lakes. And it's really nice to hear the report from Tiber, because I know I'm not looking forward to it as much as the folks in Montana, but I'm looking forward to that red dot in Montana going away. That's going to be a really good day. So again, this is where boaters are destined to. It's biased towards Pacific Northwest just because of the proximity to the state and where we're inspecting boats, but you can see this is where the boaters are saying they're going to. Just real quick on time of day and time of week, and so if I were to have one thing to take home from this story is, you know, inspect boats on the weekends. If you have to pick Saturday, Sunday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then pick boats during the middle of the day. That's not to say that boats aren't coming through on a Tuesday at midnight, but it's just not as frequent. So all stations, all hours, this is the bigger picture. And then we also hone in on those stations that are specifically open at night and trying to pinpoint when it's most effective to operate the stations. And so we've been able to use this data set at other corridors with similar demographic to help make those management decisions on where we spend that resource. And then lastly, just to wrap up, I know I'm over time, usually am, but this is where the mussel-fowl boats are coming from, what stations they're going through, and where they are destined. You can see Malad on I-15 and Cedars are on I-90. Those are two primary stations in Idaho that catch mussel-fowl watercraft. They're mostly coming from the Great Lakes in the Midwest and Lake Powell. And then for the most part, they're destined to Idaho and Washington, as well as other places. And so, you know, I think I've shared a slide in previous meetings talking about the various nets as you go to and through the Pacific Northwest and how we communicate with one another. And that's one of the strong points, obviously, of this group, and just how well we do that. So anyways, that's my little spiel on boat inspection, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Nick. I don't see any questions yet for you. So we will go next to Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and the original agenda says Zach Creek, but Tom Wolf is going to be chatting today. So
earlier, delisting Tiber is a huge watershed moment for the state. Be on the lookout for public comment coming out here. Should have came out last December or at the end of December, but it should be coming out any day now to start the process of delisting Tiber as a mussel positive water body. Our plan would be to totally disengage from Tiber, no longer do inspections up there, and lift all restrictions while continuing to sample and survey, but no evidence of mussels up there.
hey Tom.
Yes.
Tom, are you moving? You need to like touch at least on the next slide, however you want to do it. I mean, because you're still in like the editing mode of your PowerPoint.
Oh, this is terrible. I apologize, everyone. Does that work?
I'm not seeing it move forward.
No. Okay. I'll just talk.
Okay.
Because I can't seem to get to go here.
Okay.
So we did have a record number of mussel-fowl vessels intercepted this year, 61 as opposed to 35 last season, which was a very busy year. Most or half of those were recently purchased boats, most of them coming from the Midwest. Our numbers of inspections overall were similar to 2019, a little bit higher, not as high as 2021 or 2020, sorry. Interesting stats on our mussel-fowl boats that we intercepted. So 128 total if we look at 2018 to 2021. I have some great graphics here that you can't see. 77% of those mussel-fowl boats were coming from eastern states, and 95% of those had never been inspected before. 54% of those boats were recent purchases, and that's probably an underestimate because sometimes we don't get that information appropriately when the boat's right there at the inspection station. We're getting better at that, and I think that's something we improve on moving forward. 90% of those mussel-fowl boats are coming from eastern states. That's not the same as we see in Idaho and other places, but for Montana in particular, that eastern influence is significant. 31% of those are commercially hauled And that's also probably an underestimate because of these buddy haulers that just hook up a boat and move a boat for money, but they're not necessarily a commercial or a company. They're just a guy with a truck. And a third of those boats are destined for Montana. Record year for AIS sampling and survey, as Craig indicated, so that was great. We're getting out there looking for invasive species more, and we're finding a lot of different species this year: New Zealand mud snails, red-ribbed Melania snails, Eurasian water milfoil, curly-leaf pondweed, all new detections in the state. And the program has stepped up our treatment programs as well. We're hopeful that Asian clam population we have in Billings is going to be eradicated with this drawdown. And we did, Craig did some Eurasian water milfoil herbicide treatments as well this year on the Rocky Mountain front with a new population. Aquarium dumps is something that we're focusing on for next year. I hope Leah speaks to that a little bit when she talks about don't let it loose, but that's something where we're putting signs up at urban ponds, encouraging people not to dump aquaria, encouraging, you know, trying to go after that pathway a little bit more, especially with our mothball incident recently, trying to get that word out there right to places where in urban environments where people potentially dump these things. Expanding partnerships, we have a number of additional conservation districts that are assisting us this year, taking over managing watercraft inspection stations. That's going to leave only 4 stations that are managed by FWP or staffed by FWP staff this next season. Most of them are going to be tribes, conservation districts, and county partners, which is outstanding. And those partners are also more and more assisting with early detection survey and outreach and education, getting them out there to help deliver the message of clean, drain, dry, don't let it loose, and also getting them out there to actually look for and survey for invasive species statewide. And that's all I have. I apologize for those technical issues that I still don't understand.
The dual screen thing is a complication. Thank you, Tom. Let's see, I don't see any questions here. Okay, so next we have, hold on here. Blaine. Blaine, are you there? Huh. We were supposed to have Blaine talk from the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. Looks like he's not online. Well, I guess we're going to circle back to Blaine because he doesn't look like he's on the webinar right now.
I'll text him, Leah.
Okay. He's been sending me messages during this entire thing. All right, well, now let's move to Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Eric Anderson, I will make you presenter. Okay, Eric, you just need to unmute yourself.
Okay, did the screen come up?
Screen's up, I can hear you and I can see you. Fantastic.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick on this. So doing an overview of 2021 for Washington, and I've got to put this one up to basically show where we came from for 2017 through 2020. Smallest program out of the Northwest states. We operated 2 check stations, seasonal operation with them, and we had to do as I called it, adaptive management or creative funding to stretch our minimal state funds. And the crew that we have had that has been with us is such a dedicated staff. They literally moved mountains because they were, you know, they got heart. They're a team. They just have a spirit of doing this. They want to protect the state, and it showed going into 2021. And fortunately for us, now oh great, now I'm locked. There we go. So going into 2021, thankfully we had the Marimo moss ball incident that actually hit during our legislative session, brought zebra and quagga mussels to the forefront, and lo and behold, our legislature decided to give us a substantial increase of our state budget. And with that, we were able to permanently fund both our Spokane and Pasco stations, and all of our crew is now permanent state employees, hopefully never to be laid off again like they had to do back in 2019. So it was just awesome. Additionally, for 2021, thankful to Bureau of Reclamation, they gave us a grant to start a third station, a pilot project out of the Cle Elum area. Strategically placed, so it's actually eastbound on I-90. So any boats that are coming up I-5 out of the south or coming down from the north that turn to head into the Columbia River Basin are intercepted at that location. So for our stats, we'll go through the stations one at a time. Spokane now is going to be open 365 days a year. And this year we operated at January through May and September through December from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then in the dead of summer, we operated from 6 a.m. till midnight. We ended up having 27,199 inspections out of that station. They dealt with 38 mussel boats. They had 5,700 plus that were last on infested waters, 40 full decontaminations. They did 44 standing water decontaminations, and you can see the rest of it. Also out of that station, they tracked down 34 watercraft notice movements. So whenever we get a watercraft movement notice that's in the vicinity of our stations, it's assigned to them, and they will make all the phone calls and actually make arrangements to track down and check that boat physically, either direct them into the station, or we'll send station folks to go meet them someplace to do the inspection. So Spokane. Okay, come on. Next slide, please. There we go, Pasco. So Pasco did 8,045 inspections this year, of which 4,200 plus were last on positive infested waters. They did 64 standing water decons, 3 full decons, and as you can see the rest of the information there. They also tracked down 5 watercraft movement notices, and again, permanent station now. So our crew down there, we're going to be expanding it this year. Cle Elum, our pilot station, opened March 15th of this year. It's going to operate seasonally because it is affected by snows. In fact, we've been checking right now, and most of the equipment there is buried under about 8 feet of snow, but we will be working to get it open starting April 1st of this year. April and May and October, it operated from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then June through September went 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. As you can see, big station for us, 18,689 inspections, of which 5,900 plus were last on positive waters. They dealt with 1 mussel boat, did 7 full decons, and did 14 standing water decons. And they also tracked down 7 watercraft movement notices. So to bring it up, you can see we've had exponential growth in the station, and 2021 was our highest station ever, or highest inspections ever. Between the 3 stations, we had 944 check station days and 55,812 total boats inspected between the 3. That was a 23,000 plus inspection increase from 2020, and we dealt with 39 mussel boats this year. Then also want to give a shout out to Tegan Ward and the Watcom program. She gave me the information today. They also had for 2021 14,415 inspections, of which they had 10 full decontaminations. Most of the boats that they decontaminated were from an infested water body, and they had standing or unverifiable water. And then they did have 1 sailboat that had been used in Lake Powell, and they found a quagga shell in the anchor bag. It was a full inspection or full decontamination. So if you add that in Washington in 2021, there were 70,277 total inspections, and we dealt with 40 mussel boats. So for 2022, what's ahead is we're now going to we're going to add 2 more stations. Thank you to Bureau of Reclamation and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The BOR gave us a 2-year pilot project grant to run a check station down in Southwest Washington out of the Vancouver area. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife gave us one for running one down in the Clarkston area. So that is going to increase us to 5. And also a note on that BOR gave us an extension grant of Cleellum to fund it for an additional 2 years. So really grateful for that. Because of the extra funding, I wanted to note that we're going to run Spokane and Pasco in 2022 from roughly June through September, as long as we can hire enough folks. I know that everybody's starting to go through this crunch where it's getting hard to hire people. People don't just want to go back to work. But if we can do it, we are planning on running Spokane and Pasco from May through September, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's going to be interesting to get some data from that on those major routes to see what happens in those late night and early morning hours that we haven't ran in the past. And then the big announcement, which we're excited about, is in 2022, we are going to be having Puddles 2.0 join Washington. So we're going to get a second mussel dog. Right now, we have a personal service contract that's getting finalized for a trainer to find the dog and train the dog for us. We're doing position description for the second dog handler and crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's on that. And so we are hopeful to have that in place June. We're also probably going to work with the Invasive Species Council, and we actually may have a contest for naming our new dog. And then finally, it's kind of ironic that Stephen's been talking about being in this for 20 years. So anyway, here's a photo of him recently taken. And with that, we have questions.
Nice, Eric. Okay. Okay, I have some questions for you already, and I had one of my own as well. It kind of dovetails. So Kate Wilson is asking you, can you tell us about hashtag it's not rough?
Oh, well, hashtag it's not rough. That's just the hashtag for Puddles, the catchphrase. It's not rough to clean, drain, and dry your boat. And so that's, we came up with that. I just got a note from Stephen. I got to laugh. So yeah, no, we came up with that as the tag phrase. That is Puddles hashtag. It's not rough to stop AIS and clean and drain, dry your boat.
Cool. So I noticed that Puddles was at most of those pictures of the stations. Does she kind of, or she travel around she works at all of the stations where needed, or she does stints at all locations? Okay.
Yes, Puddles moves around. Pam will take in, it's primarily out of Spokane because that's where Sergeant Taylor is stationed. Right. But she takes her around to all the stations. She makes a route. She also has been taking her and doing some classroom presentations and some other things with her as well. So we're really excited that we're going to bring on the second handler and a second dog. And ultimately, we've started doing a statewide strategic plan. And we hope to actually break it down into zones, an Eastern Washington zone and a Western Washington zone, and have a dog handler in each zone to go to the stations. Ultimately, our plan is to hopefully have a perimeter defense in 8 stations in the state of Wash.
Cool. Okay, I have a follow-up question about the crayfish you mentioned. So Stacy Schmidt's asking, what were the details behind that crayfish found at the station? Species, or what do you know? What do you know?
Good question. I'm not sure what the species was on it that was provided for me, but it was, what I do know is it was bait. Most of the critters that were found were people transporting live bait in violation of the state regulations.
Okay. All right. Well, I think you're off the hook now, unless Stephen has something else to say. I'm just kidding.
What if Mr. Magoo doesn't want to fund puddles? What are you going to do then?
Mr. Magoo. Okay. So I'm just going to double check here to see if Blaine, does he need to talk? I'm not sure if he has access.
He's back.
Blaine, I just unmuted you if you want to. So Blaine Parker with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. Blaine, do you have anything you would like to share with the group here?
Yeah, I want to just do a couple of things. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm not sure how long I last, so if I just blip out, my internet's acting kind of wonky. So first of all, I'd like to announce and to introduce our newest tribal ANS coordinator from the Nez Perce tribe, Anthony, I'm going to mess his name up probably, Capetillo. And he is now on as a full-time ANS coordinator for the Nez Perce tribe. So that's fantastic. Something I've been hoping to see for years, that each of the member tribes are able to procure funding and get a full-time ANS person on board. So welcome, Anthony. Hope you're enjoying the meeting. Just a few updates. We don't have any active monitoring programs organized by CRITFIC or the tribes that I'm aware of right now, at least done with CRITFIC for sure. The one thing that we are looking at doing is getting back, hopefully after this next surge. Been working on, we have funding to do a outreach and education grant with coordinating with USGS, Fish and Wildlife Service, and WSU to go to 3 different locations, hopefully in the summer of 2022, to provide outreach and education for the different tribes in those regions throughout the state of Washington. So that's on tap, and that's really pretty much it. Just trying to keep information flowing to our tribal commissioners, policymakers. Continue to reach out to our tribal fishing community to keep an eye out for northern pike and invasive and dirty boats. So that's it.
Great, thank you, Blaine. All right, I believe, last but not least, we have Hillary Smith here with the Department of Interior. Hillary, I see you join. Oh, there you are. Hi, Hillary.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and it's at the end of your full day on the East Coast. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. We're even a couple minutes early right now. So the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Perfect. I was just wondering, how do I share my screen again?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were going to share your screen. I can do that. Gloria, here you go.
Okay. Okay. Nothing too exciting here, just a list of things I wanted to share with you. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be with you. Usually I do try to attend the full meetings, but unfortunately I was just joining a few minutes ago. So, but just in time to hear Eric's roast of Stephen, which is always a highlight. So glad to be here. I'm not sure if Teresa and Heidi talked about some of the points that I'll be mentioning today, so I apologize if there's some redundancy. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Hillary Smith. I'm the Department of the Interior Senior Advisor for Invasive Species based here in DC, and have really enjoyed working with this team over the years. So I just wanted to provide a quick update on some of our work on mussels, as well as broader invasive species coordination work. So for zebra and quagga mussels, as I've reported in the past, after safeguarding the West sunsetted, we of course continued our commitment to coordination on zebra and quagga mussel issues. So we continue to have bi-monthly meetings with representatives at the national, regional, and local levels from across 6 DOI bureaus. And so as part of this, we share information about, again, what the bureaus are doing with respect to mussels, opportunities for leveraging funding and investments that we're making, and report out on other basin-wide initiatives, as well as broader Western Regional Panel work, such as the Quagga Zebra Mussel Plan 2.0. So with respect to funding, again, this is something that we heard from our partners, both in the Columbia River Basin and more broadly across the West, about the importance of really trying to maximize the federal investments and make sure we're coordinated and again, using the limited resources that we have to meet priorities across the West. So we continue to have those conversations. And I know I've mentioned in the past the Interagency Agreement that Fish and Wildlife Service led in partnership with BLM, Park Service, and Reclamation to help fund the watercraft inspection, decontamination trainings, as well as the Westwide database. And those are continuing to be important initiatives for us as well, and in the middle of that 5-year agreement. With respect to QZAP 2.0, again, when safeguarding sunsetted, we heard through the WRP that there was really an interest to have kind of one blueprint that we work from. And then with the release of QZAP 2.0, it really transitioned nicely from us focusing on the safeguarding at Interior to help advance the QZAP priorities. And so our DOI Interior representatives, who are also on the executive committee for WRP, have been keeping us apprised of the discussions that WRP are having with respect to those priorities. And then we have also talked about setting, kind of reviewing that list of work within QZAP 2.0 to understand and identify where Interior can play an important role. So at our upcoming meeting in March, this internal meeting that we have, we're going to continue to have that conversation. And I had reached out to Leah and Dennis about whether there was some kind of tracking mechanism already in place that we could feed into. So I was thrilled that there's already a spreadsheet that has all the strategies. And so our team is going to talk about how we can help to report against that, that body of work, which we're excited to help support. Moving on to the interagency MOU. Again, this is among the 6 bureaus at Interior, as well as the Forest Service and the Army Corps. We continue to meet as needed and to identify kind of the baseline activities we're doing each fiscal year to advance the work in that MOU. And then we also identify specific areas that we can advance collaboratively. And so one of those areas I think I mentioned last year was identifying the federal agency points of contact, as well as available resources, not just financial, but other things like equipment and lab services. And so we're very near to having that kind of living document of POCs and resources available, ready to share with partners. So I'm hoping by next week I can get that over to Leah and team to distribute as they see fit. So I'm excited about that. And then we're participating with the broader Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force Early Detection and Rapid Response Committee with respect to training opportunities for rapid response and incident command system. So these are also key elements that were identified in our Mussels MOU, but also in the ANSTF strategic plan. So rather than just taking that on in isolation, we teamed up with ANSTF to help support their work more broadly. And then with respect to moss falls, certainly this is something that still is requiring a lot of attention and investment of time, particularly through our Fish and Wildlife Service in coordination with USDA and CBP and others. So I believe Susan Pasco will be on tomorrow to provide a more detailed update on moss falls. And again, perhaps Teresa had shared some of that work as well. And then moving on to just more general updates. Again, last year we were excited to announce the DOI Invasive Species Strategic Plan, which is a 5-year plan, high-level document to help guide the work at interior agencies. So we completed year 1 of that plan and are looking to put together a brief summary of accomplishments. But in general, some of the work that, at least at the national level, that we were working on together involves some of the priority actions we heard through our listening sessions, which was really providing access to information and experts at the federal agencies. And so for Interior, one of the things we did was to identify training opportunities for invasive species that we lead and make that available, make that information available to our partners. So we sent that out, I believe, in the fall to a variety of partner lists. And we also did an internal training needs assessment to understand what our own employees need to do their jobs better when it comes to invasive species management and integrated pest management. We're also pretty close to having a funding document available that outlines all the different funding programs available through interior agencies. And we focused on internal coordination and communications by developing an internal website, essentially, again, to help connect practitioners across interior. So really just trying to shore up the set of expertise and relationships that we have across all of our jurisdictional boundaries within interior. We also put together a DOI invasive species and integrated pest management expert list. And so we're now in the throes of focusing on what we are going to prioritize in year 2 of the work plan for the strategic plan. Again, just at the national level, certainly there's a tremendous amount of work that's happening across the nation to help advance that plan and also align that with administration priorities. Which brings me to the next bullet, which is really a big emphasis of our work right now is the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I'm sure maybe Stephen, I always learn a lot from you during your legislative updates. So maybe this has already come up today and maybe it will be a focus tomorrow, but from an interior perspective, this is a tremendous opportunity to advance a lot of important invasive species work. So this law has a tremendous amount of funding across many different categories. So for invasive species in particular, I've been focused on one line of accounting specifically in the bill, and that is under Ecosystem Restoration Program. And within that program, I believe there are 10 activities, and one of those activities is invasive species. And there's not a lot of guidance in the law. It just says for invasive species prevention, detection, and eradication, including research and detection at points of entry, as well as eradication grants for federal and non-federal lands. So the Ecosystem Restoration Program dollars are directed to the Office of the Secretary. And so right now, there are decisions still being made about the broader spend plan for ecosystem restoration dollars, how that would go out and to whom and by when and those kinds of things. So they're still at a very high level, and so we don't have details yet with respect to the invasive species spend plan. There's $100 million directed towards interior, and then 100 to USDA as well. Outside of the invasive species line of accounting in what we're calling BILL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, There's also resources for invasives that can be eligible through other ecosystem restoration activities, I would imagine, as well as through other areas of the bill. So wildland fire isn't certainly an area outside of aquatics, but for terrestrials that we're very interested in collaborating on with the different bureaus that are leads on those dollars. There's also investments to Bureau of Reclamation for our invasive species work as part of their watershed, healthy watersheds effort. And then there's funding to the Fish and Wildlife Service for invasives for Lake Tahoe, as well as the sagebrush steppe. So right now we're just trying to get a handle of who are the leads within the agencies for these dollars, what's the scope of use, how can we leverage those dollars as best as possible to meet priorities. So more to come on that. And I think maybe I'll just leave it at that for now. And so there's a lot in motion, and feel free to reach out at any time as you have questions. I'll turn it back to you, Leah. Stop sharing my screen here.
Thank you, Hillary. Perfect. Okay, well, let's see. I don't see any questions for you yet. Let me just double check. Okay. No questions.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Hillary, at the end of your day.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay. Well, super. We have made it to the end of our agenda here, and I'm trying to pull up the agenda for tomorrow so you guys can see. Okay. All right, so hopefully you guys can see that close enough. Let me go to tomorrow. So tomorrow we start again at 10 a.m. Pacific, and we have a lot of different kind of presentations, the boat hauler outreach project, rapid response. We're going to talk about mossballs and don't let it loose. A little bit more detail on organisms and trade and horizon scanning. And then, excuse me, Northern Pike, a legislative update, and some more detail on crayfish. So I guess with that, Stephen, if you have any other announcements or things you want to share here.
No, I think we're good. So good to hear from everybody, and we will reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Thank you to all of our presenters and for all of you that stuck with us throughout the day, and any little technological glitch is just par for the course. So thank you and have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow.